are live. Okay. Got more water here. And people are not here yet. One person. Hello, one person. How are you? So, for the playback, until somebody leaves a comment or asks something, I'm just going to start talking about something so you guys don't have to watch me wait. Let's see, I don't know what to talk about. So last week, I was not here because Thanksgiving. And yeah, so here we are now. It's been a couple weeks. And let's see here. English. What about English? So I have some very big things coming up for anybody who's interested. And I'm going to talk more about that later today once more people get in here. Hello, how are you? Nice to see you here. Thanks for commenting in the chat. Hope everything's well. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about that a bit later in today's live stream. Hopefully we'll get our regulars in here today, and we'll see what happens. But I'm also going to be talking pretty soon about the idea that General American is neutral, which I don't think it is, and I'm doing some research on it, and I think there's a lot of false impressions and false information about what is the American accent. So I'm going to be talking a bit about that as well in the near future. But let's see. I'm going to start talking about a topic here. Let's talk about what I've been thinking about recently. Well, on TikTok, if you don't follow me on TikTok, that might be useful because I don't just post the same things that I post here on YouTube or over on Facebook. Facebook, I usually just cross-post between YouTube and Facebook, but on TikTok, as you can see, it's kind of, yeah, it's very bright, but I have a TikTok, and some of the stuff is similar. Obviously, I only have 1 minute, so I talk a bit about the vowel sounds and some other things. But one activity that seems to be very, very popular that I'm making lessons about is called fill in the blank listening. And we can actually do one of those right now. Fill in the blank listening. And so what that is basically where I say a sentence 3 times, and you will see the sentence on the screen. We can't do that here because I can't just put the sentence on the screen. I'm using my webcam here. But there would be blank spots, so you have to fill in the blanks. So it's like a listening dictation, but you have some of the information. But because of that, I try to make it difficult, right? So one example that I did was, but where'd she go? And I bet you guys can't guess what the apostrophe D is in this case. Is that would? Is that had? Well, we know it's not had because that would be had gone, right? Normally, we tell the difference between apostrophe D would and apostrophe D had by the main verb. It's either gone or go. Gone with had, go with would. But this is actually a special case in spoken English where it's did. Yes, there are special circumstances where we can contract did in speech. It's one of the less common contractions compared to the standard normal things, but it does exist, and it's not necessarily informal either. But remember, contractions generally are definitely not informal, especially the standard contractions. They're just a part of how we speak. So here we have where, but where did she go? So there you go. Now, the way that I said this sentence in the exercise on TikTok, I said, but where'd she go? But where'd she go? So I'm actually dropping that T, right? I'm saying like, but where? And then we have that stop D. But where? That is a variation that is perfectly possible. It's not necessarily informal. It's just more likely in fast speech. And these are the kind of details that are actually directly related to the big lesson that I'm making with this possibly new concept. But after that, we have where'd and she'd, or sorry, where'd and she. So where'd she? Where'd she? And if you listen closely, you'll notice that the she, the sh, is not exactly the same as a normal sh. And that's just because we're stopping that D. We have to go to that D position, but we're not pushing the D out. You could clearly enunciate, but where'd she go? And there might be a case for that, or it might happen to come out that way. Most likely, we're going to stop that D, either as a glottal stop or a regular stop. And then we have to push the sh out through that stopped position, right? We're not going to say where'd she unless it's a full-on glottal stop, which we probably wouldn't do here because that stops the flow. And it's not necessary. Possible, but not necessary. So where'd she? Where'd she? Okay. It's very similar to when we say like it's, and we push that S out through the T. It's, right? Hello, Elmy. Thank you for joining us and saying hi. We have currently 3 people watching. So how are you? I hope everything is good. Everything is going fantastic, especially given the global circumstances at the moment. But yeah, and those are the big special things there. So you could drop the T on but, you could do stop on the D, push the SH through it. You can contract the did with where did, and then we have go. That's what's at the end. So, but where'd she go? But where'd she go? Yeah, I'm kind of just talking about stuff, Elmy, because instead of me sitting here waiting for people to ask questions, I figure it's useful to actually just talk about stuff. I'm good, and you? Where is your hat? Where's my hat? I have a hat. Oh, the cowboy hat. I suppose that's what you're referring to, unless you're talking about my jazz hat, which is it won't fit on my head right now because of my headset. Yeah, I forgot to notice that my background is different for you guys. The jazz hat, yeah. That is over here. Ta-da! Yeah, I think this is called a fedora, technically. I'm not a hat, super big hat guy. But yeah, there we go. Now I have a hat. It's not going to stay on. So my background is different for you guys, which, of course, is because I like to move things around every 3 to 6 months or so. So if you continue to attend my live streams, eventually you will notice a different setup. Maybe it'll be like before, I don't know, but this is where we are now. So you can see my recording setup. You can see my laptop, which is partially broken. And that's my drawing desk, which I haven't been using much because I haven't been drawing. And over here is some of my workout equipment. But anyway, We have a question from Matt. Can his and he's be pronounced the same way in fast speech? Sorry for taking a second to get to your question here. So let's see. They're not supposed to be. They're not supposed to be. So he's obviously uses that first vowel E, just spelled with one E, but it's the first vowel E, which is usually spelled with two E's, um, or EA. And his, of course, is the second vowel. So they both have Z's at the end. They both have H's at the front, but it's just that one vowel different. And this uses that second vowel, like it. So if for whatever reason you are enunciating clearly enough, they definitely should not be pronounced the same. But in fast speech, that's the question. So if I say he's okay, okay, now I say he's okay. He's okay. So in fast speech, I can definitely hit that E. That's fine. Let's see if I change it to the second vowel. He's okay. He's okay. He's okay. Yeah, it sounds really lazy, really messy. I don't want to quite say it sounds wrong necessarily because I can imagine in fast speech, only in fast speech, that it could come out that way. But it's also kind of now starting to sound almost like it's because that H might be very weak or it could disappear depending on the sound before it. And then we have is and it's, which they don't sound exactly the same, but they can sound kind of similar. So yeah, it's possible. It's possible. I would say most of the time between these two words, um, he's is most likely going to come out with the first vowel because that's what it's supposed to be. It doesn't really reduce to his, um, but it is possible. Yes, that's in my opinion. You ask another native, maybe they'll say no, that sounds horrible, but to me it sounds okay. Um, yeah, good. Any other questions? If not, I'll go back to the type of thing I was talking about. um, I want to wait for some other people to get here before I really get into some of the bigger topics that I have in mind. But we only have now two people. um, was three, now it's two. Somebody left. Makes me sad. Why would you leave? I'm just not entertaining enough. That's okay. um, Yellow. Well, purple. Yes, I know why you're saying that. I'm playing on it. Some people, for those who don't know, of the other people who are here, the other two people, it's possible for a native, especially when answering the phone, to say yellow instead of hello. And that is what Seedent is doing there. It's sort of a special thing. It's not a standard, you're not supposed to say it that way. But I am good, Seedent. How are you? Very nice to see you here as always. Matt says, I say, okay. So, Matt, I don't know how long you've been following my stuff. I know you commented recently, so, and I see you're using IPA. IPA is fine, no problem. I do have some issues with the IPA, which we can discuss if you want. So I know the BOJ, the J is IPA for, at least I think it's supposed to be for the Y sound, right? Like yeah, boy, boy, and you're saying instead of like BO and the second vowel on the vowel chart, boy, boy. So you're saying you maybe go a little bit deeper to like a Y sound. Honestly, there's not really much difference. If you're going all the way up into E, the first vowel sound, which would be an IPA, that lowercase I, that's going to sound off. But the Y sound is so close that if you use if you put like an actual Y sound at the end of after the O, or if you put the second vowel after the O, they're going to sound pretty much the same. So yeah, unless by J you mean Boge with a J sound, which I don't think you do, and that would definitely be wrong. So I was going to say something about related to the IPA. Oh yeah, so that's why you'll hear me commonly talk about like first vowel, second vowel, third vowel, whatever, because I'm referring to the vowel chart, which I think there's a link in the description of this live stream. My website downloads, and you can download my vowel charts if you haven't already. But the IPA it's supposed to be like a universal alphabet that can, describe, all the sounds in all languages. And for the most part, I think that it does a pretty good job. But in English, it's kind of problematic because there's just so much variation in English, and so many like subtle regional differences in this and that. And I notice when I go to the dictionary and I look up, the IPA pronunciation, a lot of the time I'm just like that doesn't even sound good to me. So, and there are various reasons for that, but I also think the IPA is just a handicap, right? It doesn't actually help you train your ears. It just helps you visually see, okay, it's supposed to be this sound. But so that can be useful as like one reference tool, but if you just train your ears to hear the sound anyway, you don't need that. So it's kind of just like a useless intermediary step that isn't completely useless. It can be useful, but I am a much bigger advocate of or supporter of actually training the physical mechanics of your hearing, your ears, and getting your brain to hear the difference between sounds, so that you can just understand what it is that you hear without having to check the IPA. But anyway, that's just my perspective on it. Seedon says he is late. He says hi to Elmy. Elmy, tips about consonant clusters, PR, BR, PL, and BL. Yeah, that was mentioned, I think, last time. Do I have tips about that? I'm gonna come back to that. Let me see what else is going on here. R plus D combinations are giving me a very hard time, as I told you before, like words like card, hard, etc. Okay, we'll talk about that as well. I can say card easily. Yeah, so with the T you're fine, but with the D you're not. That can happen. I'm good, thanks. Okay, so I'm gonna go to Elmy's question here, but Sedent, are we talking R plus D fully enunciated, where you're actually pushing the D out, or are we talking about like at the end of words where it might be a stop sound, like a stop D? Go ahead and let me know about that. For Elmy's question, tips about consonant clusters. Consonant clusters can be very problematic. Beginning, I think you mean beginning. Beginning, you mean at the start of words? Sedent says yes. I'm so confused now. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Well, consonant clusters, I mean, it doesn't particularly matter where they are. If they're at the start of a word, that's a good place to start, because you don't have to worry about anything before it necessarily, like problem or brother. But of course, this can happen inside a word, and you still have to be able to do that. So the position isn't really going to change the cluster pronunciation much, if at all. So this is a common issue. So if we say problem, for example, I actually, I don't know if I probably never solved it. I got better at it, but I noticed later in my Spanish studies, because remember, Spanish is the language that I first successfully taught myself. I had experimented with Japanese and German and some other stuff here and there at various times. But Spanish is the language that I actually learned how to speak like, pretty well. And it's where I learned that I have sort of a talent for sounds and this and that. But I didn't know what I was doing. I had to figure everything out the hard way. And it wasn't until later that I realized, because I can do r, just like a single flapped R, and that's usually not a problem. I always had trouble with the rolled R. That took me about 6 months just to start doing. But in Spanish, the word problem is problema. And that pr, that combination combined with the the BL in close proximity in the word problema, that gave me so much difficulty. And I didn't even realize it at first. I just thought I was saying it okay. But my Spanish partner was like, no, like that's really not clear and it sounds weird. And I was like, oh. um, so in all languages, these can be an issue. Even if the word that you have in your language is pronounced in a similar way. Um, my first tip for consonant clusters, probably my biggest tip for consonant clusters, is to make sure that you can consistently and properly, in like a fully enunciated way, pronounce each part of the cluster in isolation. Because if you can't do that, obviously, the cluster is going to have some problems. Um, and it's a very common thing, usually related to vowels, like sounds before or after a vowel, but it could be with consonant clusters. It's a very common thing that maybe, one sound by itself, or in most conditions, um, you can say the sound perfectly fine, but then you put it next to a particular sound, like in a cluster, and we have problems. So that's normal. If we look at PR, for example, so you want to make sure that your P is good. Now, this might seem like a very subtle thing that you may not even realize it, because most likely your language has a P sound, right? Now, it may not be a strong P sound because some languages just have a weak P, but we have the aspirated strong P and then the weaker P, right? So here we're at the start of a stressed syllable. It's supposed to be pra. Okay, so we're getting more of that breath because it's stressed. So the P is still aspirated. Um, problem. Yeah. Um, the the cluster might kind of weaken that breath a little bit, or you might not hear it as much because of the voice on the R. Um, so it might change the quality of the P a little bit. But that aside, make sure that your lips are good. So there's not, you don't necessarily always have to go into a perfect position. I'm going to be talking a lot more about that in that big lesson I'm making. But right, you bring your lips together. P, p. I know from teaching many different students that sometimes, like I think it's in Russian. I've taught a lot of Russian students, and some of them tell me that this is true, and others tell me that it's not, that in the way they speak. So maybe it's a regional thing in Russia. I don't know. But I've had some Russian students where when they do p, b, and they don't just close their lips, they kind of curl their lips, where it's like p, b, And if we're really enunciating or really emphasizing, we might do that for like extra effect. Um, but that's not the normal way that we do it. And so sometimes that could be part of the problem. So if you're like, curling your lips, or if you're not closing the P enough and you're saying like problem, where it's not quite closed, it's too light, right? So you want to make sure that it's sufficiently clear enough. It doesn't have to be perfectly clear, but sufficiently clear enough. Yeah, and I know you're a Portuguese speaker because you're from Brazil. I assume you're a Portuguese speaker since you're from Brazil. But I know in Spanish, for example, like especially with the B, like they might say, for example, I don't know, estaba caminando. I was walking, and instead of saying like estaba, where it's like a nice clear B, they might just sort of barely get close enough. Estaba. It's like not even completely closed. So if you're used to that in your language, that there are times where maybe you could do that in English if you're speaking quickly. It's a little complicated, but that, like, compared to English, that seems more like a Spanish thing. And so anyway, make sure that the components are correct. The second tip about the consonant clusters. Clusters They don't necessarily have to, but they tend to do what I like to call an overlap. And I don't know if there's a technical pronunciation term for this that linguists use. Maybe there is. I call it an overlap. And what an overlap is any time that you are doing two sounds at the exact same time. And that might sound impossible, but remember you have lips and you have a tongue. So the lips and tongue can be moving independently, right? And that's usually what happens. One good example, if I say, I don't know, in water, right? Put it in water. So I can close my tongue for the N, and before I release the N, I can already be bringing my lips out for the W. So there's this quick little moment, especially in fast speech, it's super, super small, where I'm not releasing the N and then pushing the lips out to say the W. I'm sort of overlapping them. So in, okay, I'm still holding the N. In, and then I let my tongue fall, and my lips are already there in the W. In water. And you can hear when that goes from the nose to the mouth. In water. Okay, that's what I call an overlap. When we're doing consonant clusters, they don't necessarily have to overlap, but they're supposed to. Ideally, they're supposed to. So if you have PR, your lips are doing the P, and when you release that P, your tongue needs to already be in the R position. If it's not, you're going to sound weird. Like you're adding an extra sound between the P and the R. Like if you say, instead of purr, you say purr, purr, purr. Okay, it's like I'm adding a schwa, and I'm saying p-er. But if the R is already there, then once my lips open, you immediately hear it because it's already in the R position. Purr, 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 or burr. You just make the P voiced. Obviously, if it's P, which is voiceless, and you're going to an R, which is voiced, you do need to make sure that your P doesn't sound like a B, which is voiced. So there is a balance there if that's part of the problem. But that's how it goes. If we have PL, for example, you go up into the L, just like I mentioned would go up into the N for in water. You go up to the L, which is very similar position. You're going to hold that, but your lips are first going to go into the P or B. Your tongue's going to be up here, already in position. You release that P or B, and the L is just there. Pull, 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 play, play. Now, this one, it doesn't have to be exact. There could be a little bit, tiny, 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 tiny bit of a gap where it's not quite overlapping. And it's kind of hard to do slowly, but if you're speaking quickly, play, play, play. It's kind of seamless. It sounds like it's overlapping. So that's the quality we're going for. And in my example, like in water, we can see that these clusters or this overlap phenomenon doesn't have to happen inside of a word, right? It can happen between words, depending. That's a slightly different dynamic. Depends on what's going to happen. If I say like up, so we have a P there, and then an R sound. Let's see, up. I don't know. Right. Okay, upright. Well, that's actually supposed to be a word. One word. It's just in the middle. Well, it's a compound word, so I guess it still works. We're sort of bringing two things together to make a new word. So upright, to sit upright, right? Your back is straight. You're nice and up. You're not like this, like I was. How would I say that? Upright, upright. Now this P, in this particular case, it's going to be really, really soft, right? It's not at the start of a stressed syllable, so it's going to change the quality of the P. But again, I'm saying I close into the P, There might be a bit of a stop there at first before you push it out. That's technically okay. But then once my lips close, my tongue immediately goes into that before I push the P out. Up. It's already there. Up. Upright. Okay. And you don't want to drag that R out too much because then it might sound like the vowel. Upright. in which case it sounds like you're saying upper right. It's in the upper right corner. Upper right corner. So that little extra delay of lengthening the can actually make it sound like something completely different. That's why we want this more or less overlap where they happen on top of each other. Very good question. Very, very. As I said, I'm going to be talking about consonant clusters in the future, but that would be my two biggest tips. Number one, make sure that you can do each part individually well enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be 100% consistent, but make sure that you can do it. And then tip number two, once you know you can do both parts, try to sort of get them on top of each other and say them like at the same time. Again, this is usually going to be between lips and tongue because they can work independently. Good. I'm glad that makes sense. Okay, now to Steven's question. If you have any follow-ups to that, Elmy, anything else you want me to clarify or combinations you want me to explain, please leave that in the chat. But to Steven's question, the R&D combinations. Okay, now you said yes, and I was asking or. So yes doesn't answer my question. Yes, fully enunciated. Got it. Okay. Do you enunciate when you say these words? Okay, that's a separate question. And that's actually directly related to this big lesson I'm making. Do you enunciate? Well, enunciation is always a choice. And there are various reasons why something might be enunciated. See, this is the thing. This is one reason why I also don't like the dictionary, because the dictionary just gives you like, okay, there's a D sound there because it's supposed to be at the end. It might be pushed out. It depends. If we clearly fully enunciate everything in the word, like in the word card or word or ward, like that's ARD, but that's not ward. That's ward. So that's actually a different combination. That's an O colored vowel where word is the vowel plus D. So be careful with that. At least in how I speak. In British English, maybe it's different. I don't know. I know you're from India, so you have a bit of that British influence in the background going on, but I do not say W-A-R-D as R. I say or, ward. Anyway, that aside, anytime there's supposed to be a D at the end, regardless of what's before it, the fully enunciated way to say it is with that D. So I could say, right, card. It's not going to be a strong D, of course, because it's not at the start of the stressed syllable. But it's possible to fully enunciate that D in a light way. Okay, it's not card, right? But card. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. That's the full pronunciation, full enunciation. Most of the time, most likely, it's going to be stopped. And that could be a full glottal stop, or it could be a non-glottal stop, which is something that I haven't talked about yet on this channel because I don't think it's a useful distinction, but it is going to be part of this big lesson that's coming up. So if I do a stop and I say card, I'm in that position. I'm making sure the voice is there so it doesn't sound like a T, and I'm stopping it. Okay, so I'm not actually pushing it out. That's the most likely way to say it, unless there's a connection or something. The card is, and it's going to connect. But by itself, if there's no connection or the next sound isn't a connection or something, then most likely it's going to be stopped. But it could come out as a D. It's possible. So the most natural thing would be for it to just be a D, or for it to be a stop, sorry. But there are times where you will hear it as a D. And that's something that the dictionary doesn't tell you, which is one reason I think the pronunciation in the dictionary is problematic. Byron Lord, hello. How are you doing? Thank you for joining the chat and watching the live stream. Okay, so then Seaton also said, where does your tongue touch when you make A or the D sound, either one? I mean in the word card. Okay, card. Yeah, good question. See if I do card. So We know with the D sound, we don't want to go too far back, right? Because that creates that sort of Indian or I guess Southern Indian sound, g, g. So we know that we want to avoid that normally. When there's the influence of an R sound, like word, card, ward, when it's a R colored O, that R, you want to make the D isn't going to be like this. It's never going to be like that. It's not going to be word, right? This is just not quite right. But because of that R, it kind of where the D would normally be kind of up more in here, like this is sort of the middle. It would be maybe a little bit ahead or in front of the bump, maybe on the bump, or maybe a little bit behind the bump. Anywhere in there is technically okay. The R might kind of end up pulling it back a little bit. So it might be just a little farther back, almost on that part there. It could even maybe be on that part. But you want to make sure that if you do that, you're not bringing the tongue like this, because that's not a D sound. Even if I do it here, duh, 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 that's not a D sound in English. Or in American English, I should say. I want to be respectful of other accents. So you want to make sure that it's closing like this, card. The very tip might kind of come up like that a little bit, but it should be kind of more like this, not like this. So if you notice that your tongue maybe isn't coming quite as far forward, one thing might be to just practice doing that and getting used to it, because then you don't have to worry about that problem. If I say card, every time I say it, it might be a little farther forward, a little farther back, but the R does kind of pull it back a little bit. So that is normal. And let's see here. Okay. People are talking to each other. Very nice. I love it. Sedent, there is one more combination, R plus L, words like, words like, or rather, names like, oh yeah, okay. Carl. Yeah, that's a cluster. I wanted to say that's a cluster. I'm not going to say the whole word, but that's what comes to mind. That's a term we have. But anyway, F word. So, very good. Elmy asked about like the PL, BL, PR, BR, but what about R and L? So the sound plus the L sound. This is difficult. This is very difficult because number one, just the R sound by itself, as a consonant or a vowel, which the vowel is just a little longer. That in itself is one of the most difficult sounds for English learners. So you want to make sure you can do that first. Okay, if you can't even do that, then you need to practice that part first. Just the R by itself, regular R, no R colored, no like R or air, none of that, just Okay, make sure that that sounds good. Once that does sound good, then you're going to want to practice make sure your R colored R sounds are good. So R, or. And once those are good, okay, then you want to make sure your L is good, right? So just like I was saying before, you want to make sure the individual pieces that you're going to use are okay, that they're sufficient enough. They don't have to be 100% perfect unless you want them to be, of course, in which case keep working. But after that, you want to do the L as well. Make sure your L is good, right? It's not where it's kind of up like this. You want to make sure L is a good quality. Now, the other thing here is because this is at the end of a word, it's most likely the fully enunciated L would be the L here, right? The light L, what I call the full L consonant. I could say Carl, oh. We're probably not going to say it that way, especially with that there. It's a little difficult to say. We're most likely, like we normally would at the end of a word with an L, we're going to do that dark L, which I call the half L vowel sound. So specifically, not just the regular L, you want to make sure that you can do a half L by itself clearly enough. It doesn't have to be 100% consistent necessarily. Ideally, yes, but you need to be able to do it most of the time that you try to do it. Okay. And that doesn't have to be natural in your flow of speech yet. Just as long as when you focus on it, you can do it, That's sufficient. So we have whatever R you need plus the half L, the dark L. Okay. Then you have to figure out, how do I go between these two? Okay. It's really very simple. If anybody here has any knowledge about programming, actually, I know Elmy does because he said he's a web. I don't know if you said web designer, web developer. I forget which one. Oh, I think you said front end. Anyway, you probably know some JavaScript, right? So you probably appreciate this, right? We're taking part one, making sure that's nice and solid. Okay, it's a functioning piece. We're taking part two, that's a functioning piece. Now what are we going to do? Well, we're going to take this one and we're going to stack them together, right? And you need to work on, how do you transition between the two? Okay, it's very step-by-step logical. Especially for problem sounds or problem combinations, this is exactly what you want to do. You want to zoom in and break it down and then put it back together. Okay, so in this case, we're going from, if it's just a regular because I think that's easier first, is just to do a regular that's not R colored, like R or. So if we say, for example, whirl, so that's just the vowel plus L. Okay. You can leave off the W if you want, it's okay, but that's just an example word. So if we say, we go okay, sounds good. And then you go okay, so you find where both are, and you feel them, and notice I'm going from one, saying it, stopping my voice, going to the other, saying it, stopping the voice, going back and forth, kind of feeling the start point, the end point, the start point, the end point. And then all I'm going to do is just not drop my voice. Okay. Earl. Now your transition between the two might not sound right. In which case, you know that when you start in the position, it sounds good. When you go to the end position, it sounds good. But if it doesn't sound good going between, that means that the way your tongue is moving between the two sounds isn't quite right. And there's not necessarily a super accurate, perfect way that this has to be. But it's possible to be too far outside of where your tongue is supposed to travel, that it just doesn't sound good. Like if you start hearing like whirl, you're adding kind of like an O almost to it. Whirl, that's not right. Okay. Or if you say like whirl, you're kind of going up to that E a little bit, getting a little bit of an L color or R colored E kind of. Your tongue isn't moving right. Okay. So you want to make sure that your transition sounds good. And you might need to get feedback on that. I recommend that you do get feedback from somebody. In Seedon's case here, you are a Patreon supporter, so if you want to send me some recordings here and there, I can give you some feedback just to let you know if you're doing okay. Not a problem. But that's how it is. That's how it is for any combination of sounds that you have trouble with. Vowels, consonants, multiple vowels, going from vowel to vowel sound. It doesn't matter. And in fact, when you do shadowing, especially if you do slow shadowing, which is a special deep practice technique, this is the kind of stuff you're doing. You're really paying attention to how your tongue is moving and trying to match exactly what you hear. Not just for the individual sounds, but also the flow of your tongue going from sound to sound. That's how you get a perfect accent or near perfect accent. And then the last detail here, once you can do the and you can do the combination, then I would bring in the R color, right? Because the R color is like a special step up. It's not just it's almost basically a diphthong in a way. So then you can start saying like arl, oral, earl, whatever it is. And make sure that you're not adding an extra syllable there, because it's not Carl, right? It's Carl. So they need to sort of blend together to an extent. It doesn't have to be perfect, but they definitely need to sound like they're just moving into each other with nothing between. So that would be a 3-step process. Get the get the ul, get them together, and then go to the R colored version that you need, plus the ul, and then transfer between those two sounds. I'm the best front end developer in the world, at least in my dreams. Well, I mean, that's you got to be the best somewhere. um, just like I'm the best Spanish speaker in the world in my dreams. Definitely not true in reality. I can tell you that, um, but that's okay. I really appreciate the kind of work you do because I tried to become a front end developer a few different times. I always ended up banging my head against the keyboard. HTML is easy; it's a markup language. It's not programming. CSS, a little more confusing. Not too bad. You get to JavaScript; it's programming. That's a whole different topic. We could talk about my thoughts on how to build any skill, including programming, but that's a different topic. So Cedant also says, wouldn't card with stop D sound like car, vehicle? No, no, this is a common question and a common problem with, I think, the way that English is taught, because when pronunciation is not really emphasized, it's these kinds of details that just fall through the cracks. There is a gigantic, huge difference between a stop sound and no sound. And this is actually directly related to this big lesson. So if everybody here is ready for me to kind of talk about the basic idea of this big lesson I'm making, it's directly relevant to this question. I can start talking about that if you guys want me to. But to answer your question specifically, okay, if I say, for example, let's take away the R part and all this stuff. Let's say stop, the word stop. Okay. Now we know by default, most likely what's going to happen is if there's no connection, the P there at the end of the word is going to be a stopped P. Okay, stop, stop. Not that hard, right? Go into the position. If it's a full glottal, you close off here. Okay, it's a stop sound. We're not pushing the P out. Now, that is completely different from this. If I say everything the same, but I don't have a P, I don't go into the P position, stop, stop. There's no P there at all. Where when I do a stop, technically, yes, there's no sound. There's no P sound, but there's the illusion of the P sound that a native speaker would interpret because of that end position in the P. Now, if we go to card, okay, I know there's only 5 people, and hello, Ariel. According to my numbers, it says 4. There was 5, but that's okay. Doesn't matter. I was gonna wait for David to get here because I know that David's gonna be really interested, but we can start anytime you guys want if you're interested. So going with to and D, okay, if I do car, where I'm not ending on that D sound, I'm just ending in right? And then maybe I just let my mouth relax as the sound disappears. Car, car, car. I'm saying that kind of weird. What am I saying? Car, car. That sounded a little weird to me. Okay, anyway. If I do that, if I go into the D position after the even if it's a little farther back than normal, that's okay. But if I go into that D position, don't push out the D, but I just stop it there. Card, card, card. See, you hear that stop. Well, you don't hear the stop necessarily, but the end of the R sound is a different quality. It sounds like it's sort of being cut off, right? Where when I just say car, it just sort of drops by itself. It doesn't sound like it's being pinched or cut at the end. And that's how we hear the difference. Okay. Oh, including me, it's 5. Yeah. Oh, now it says 5, so including me, it's 6. Yay. Yeah. Where's David? I don't know. We'll see. Maybe later. But Ariel says, I liked your review of Elsa. Well, thank you very much. And Byron also says that my review of Elsa was very useful. You are very much welcome. Very welcome. Yeah. I kind of feel like I was a bit harsh on it. Like I imagine the people who made it, like they they might think I was being too critical, but I have very high standards, and it's just like I don't know. Like, I'm not going to recommend something to you guys that I don't think is, like like the best, you know. So that's why I said, like, if your goal is just to sound really clearly enunciated and understood, it's fine. Um, but there were even some things like when she said room, like I say room, room. It's but when she said it, it was kind of like I don't even know how she did it, but it sounded different to me. I didn't notice it at first. I noticed it in the editing, and I was like, hmm. Um, anyway, so for sedent with your R and your D and all this stuff. If you have any more questions, let me know. But um, I think that should pretty much answer that. Ketchup. Okay, yeah. So Sedent says I was surprised to see Rachel on it. Rachel, like Rachel's English. Um, wait, I'm confused. Maybe my brain is just not in the right place. I don't know what's going on. Like, did Rachel do a review of it also? Because I don't think she was in my video. Oh, huh. Okay. Let me see. Um, oh my God, I'm not even typing. English. Elsa. Yeah, I see some other people have reviewed it. Okay, whatever. Never mind. Um, before the big lesson, let me say something. I started to notice something awkward and interesting. I don't know if it is something from my imagination, but I started to notice the openness of some vowel sounds. Let me rephrase. I was surprised to see Rachel's English lessons on Elsa. Okay. Yeah, see, I didn't get that part. So the way that you originally said that to see Rachel on it, that is a perfectly natural, fine way. It's just I didn't have that extra information, and so that's why I was confused. I didn't know specifically what you were referring to. Um, uh-huh. I'm not, don't worry, Elmi. I'm not skipping over you. I'm gonna come back in a second. Rachel's so what? So like things that like she's done lessons. They like took like that stuff like the sentences or whatever and put it into the app. Um, that's interesting. Maybe she has like a deal with them or something. I don't know. In the mobile version, Rachel's videos appear after the app tells you how much your pronunciation sucks. I see. I see. So they're referring to her, maybe with or without her knowledge. I assume she would probably know about it. Um, as to get more detailed information on how to fix your pronunciation. Um, that kind of sucks for me, I guess. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not bad. There's some details that her and I teach a bit differently, and I think mine is a bit easier. But yeah, it's not the end of the world. Most of what she teaches you guys, because I mean, I've done research here and there. I don't try to like follow other teachers because I don't want to be influenced by what they're doing so much. But sometimes people ask me questions like, "Oh, hey, have you seen this video from this person or whatever?" So I've seen some of her stuff, and a lot of it is exactly the same as I speak, right? Because General American is not that much different from Western American. And anyway, yeah, so it's not bad. It's just I think I teach you guys sort of like in a better, easier way that's not as complicated as the standard teaching. Um, I thought one day your lessons will also be there. Uh, if my lessons are going to be there, they're going to have to adjust the AI. Um, and they're going to have to not just adjust the AI, but they're also going to have to. I mean, little details they have to adjust, but they'll have to improve the AI because I don't think it's quite there. Um, it's fairly good. It's just it's not perfect. You shouldn't be harsh with Elsa. You're an advanced English speaker. I am an advanced English speaker. I've been speaking this language for many, many years. Like my entire life. So, but that's just the whole thing. If there is an application that is going to, especially if it claims that it's going to teach you, how to speak English clearly and properly, um, we're not even going to touch the naturalness because I think it's way off on that. It doesn't take that into consideration. But if it's claiming, if it's supposed to make you sound, nice and clear and good, and oh, it's native like or whatever, um, then even if my pronunciation is slightly different in some details, like I say "in" instead of "ing" when I add ing to a word, those little details are all it should catch. But it was catching like the V sound or the R sound was wrong, this and that, whatever, and it's just no, it's not. It can't do what it's supposed to do, but it's close. So anyway, the Elsa app doesn't. That third person S, it's going to cause you problems for a while. It's normal. The Elsa app doesn't recognize him as a native English speaker. Yeah, I know, right? Um, she needs to do something with her hair. Elsa or Rachel? Because I'm pretty sure Elsa is a machine and doesn't have hair. Okay, going back to what Elmy was saying. Rachel. I mean, I don't care how people's hair are. I don't have a problem with it. I really don't pay attention to that. But okay, so before talking about the big lesson, so Emily mentioned I started to notice something awkward and interesting. Um, Started to notice the openness of some vowel sounds. Can you elaborate on that, Elmy? I don't know if this is in comparison to Portuguese or if this is just something you've noticed like within English itself. Um, but if you can elaborate on that, I can do something with that. um, okay, so just in English. Well, in my experience teaching people from, you can keep typing. I'll just talk if you're typing pieces here. um, uh, Teaching people from all over the world. I mean, I haven't taught every person from every language. I've taught a lot of Russian speakers. I've taught quite a few Spanish speakers, some Germans, some French speakers, some people from um, couple from the Middle East, couple from like Eastern Europe, and in there, few Japanese, few Chinese, um, few Koreans. So I've taught a lot of different people, from many different backgrounds, different languages. And one thing I've noticed, I can't speak universally, but I noticed that in a lot of languages, especially Russian, this is very, very clear in Russian. Um, English seems to be a little more open-mouthed. Like when we're speaking quickly, yes, we don't have to clearly enunciate and go into the full position. So you'll see, I'm not speaking like this super open and weird and my mouth is just constant blah. No, it's not like that. But if you compare that to say like Russian, I've had a lot of Russian students and they've even told me this. They notice that when they speak Russian, their mouths are moving kind of more like this as they're speaking Russian. Just because that's just how Russians speak. And it's perfectly fine in Russian, but then when they come to English, um, and then they're speaking like this, it's just really hard to understand them. Even if I speak more slowly, there's just not enough space for it to be, understood as easily as it normally would be. So it could have to do with the relative amount, like on the vowel chart, right? You see, okay, if there's this position down with your mouth open, in one language, that fully open position might be like, and in another language, that fully open position might be like, okay. And again, speed will affect, sort of how much you open your mouth and enunciate in this. So there's different factors, but I think according to, if we take clear standard enunciation and we compare that relatively between English and other languages, I think English tends to open a bit more than many languages, at least in my experience. Definitely more than some languages, for sure. I started to notice the difference in openness between the first three vowels. Okay, so that specifically, that gives me something to focus on. Ariel says, what can you tell us about Russian speakers? Um, I don't know. I mean, most of them are really cool. I mean, I don't know all Russians, but the Russians that I've taught are pretty cool. I don't know if you mean like in their pronunciation or as people or what. Um, that is interesting. YouTube just held this for review. I'm gonna go ahead and show it. That sounds like YouTube censorship. Um, yeah, they are Russian, and Russian needs to be capitalized because it's a proper noun. But yeah, they are Russian. Or actually, the most natural way to say that would be to contract they and are, which is not informal. But I have to keep reminding people because you were probably taught wrong. They're Russian. They're Russian. Anyway, yeah, basically they're Russian. I mean, I don't know what else there is to tell you. Um, so back to Elmy. Anything you want to share about them? I'm interested in their culture. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about Russian culture per se. Like a number of Russians have told me that I need to go to St. Petersburg because there's lots of museums and stuff to see there and whatever. And I really like the cold, and I like the fact that for part of the year it's like dark most of the time. I think that's really awesome, and I want to live there, like at least temporarily, to experience that because I love the dark and I love the cold and I love the snow. um, but I mean, I haven't like sat and studied Russian culture or whatever. I know the traditional religion is what is it? It's that form of Christianity. I can't remember what it's called right now. Orthodox Christianity. Yeah. Um, but I mean, yeah, I'm not an expert on Russian or anything. I do want to learn Russian in the future. That's one of the languages I eventually want to learn. So I'll learn more about them later, but I can't really tell you a whole lot right now. Although I do know at the beginning of the year, I think it's like for the first 2 weeks, uh, it's holidays, right? Unlike here in the United States, where like maybe New Year's you might have off, Christmas usually you have off, but a lot of people these days are still even working on Christmas because of our work culture. Um, but for like 2 whole weeks, like nobody works in Russia. Like the stores are closed, the buses don't run. You have to like have food for 2 weeks so that you don't starve. At least that's what I've heard. Maybe that's not true in every part of Russia, but and I think that's fantastic. Like that's really really awesome. You just get to relax for 2 weeks. Um, but anyway, uh, so Elmy started to notice the difference in openness between the first three vowels. Yeah. Wait, so for some you say first three vowels, for some reason I'm thinking 2, 3, and 4. Probably because you said openness and I'm thinking of which is very open. But the first three vowels would be I, and eh. So or I, and eh. So you mean compared to each other, like the second vowel is a little more open than the first vowel, and the third vowel is a little more open than the second vowel, including the Okay, so then the first four vowels. um, Generally, yes. There are some minor dialectical differences here and there, but yeah, no problem. But yeah, generally that's definitely true. I mean, that's what we see on the vowel chart. We're going E when we see that point E, right? The vowel chart it shows simultaneously your mouth closed and your mouth open, right? So when you do E, your jaw is going to be pretty closed. But in order to get down to you have to open your mouth. Not necessarily super wide, there's a way that you can actually manipulate your tongue without opening your jaw that much, and still produce. It's a slightly different quality of the sound, but you can still produce the same sound. But the mouth does have to be open a certain amount. If it's not open a certain amount, then it's physically impossible to say that fourth sound. Same thing with, well, let's see, with e, e, eh, eh. So just using those three, right? The exact openness of the mouth is one component, but especially in those first three, technically speaking, I can just move my jaw a little bit, okay? And it's the tongue position is the most important. So I can say first, right? 1, 2, 3, e, eh, eh. Okay, my jaw is hardly moving at all, hardly opening at all. In reality, right? It may open a little bit more, but I could, if I'm thinking about it and controlling it, I can make those sounds primarily with my tongue. I can feel a little pressure here when I start saying because it's starting to open just a little bit. If I try to go to e, eh, ah, ah, like I'm really manipulating my tongue here to compensate for the lack of openness, but you can see my jaw is now starting to open. And so that is, again, the tongue is the most important part. The exact position of the front part of your tongue and how you're using it, that is the most important part. But it, even if my jaw itself isn't opening that much, there is a difference in openness, amount of openness between the three, because if my tongue is up here, e, and then I go and then I go okay, even if my jaw isn't opening that much, we're getting more space in the mouth, inside the mouth. And that's absolutely true. Absolutely true. So it doesn't matter if it's a front vowel, back vowel, middle vowel, whatever. The lower the vowel sound is, regardless of how much you open your mouth itself, the more space that it's going to be inside the mouth. And there are certain points, like when we say the back of the tongue might kind of still be up here more. It doesn't, the whole, if we drop the whole thing, now it's going to go more towards because that's where the back of the tongue is lower. So there might not be more space in the entire mouth, but relatively speaking, especially if it's like front, then there's going to be a lot more space in the front for sure. So it's kind of relative to which part of the mouth we're talking about, but definitely more space in some way. Yeah. And that's a fantastic observation. See, with the kinds of exercises that I give you guys, with the minimal pair training and just the way I explain the vowels and this and that, whatever, I'm trying to help you guys notice these things. And what I know from my experience learning pronunciation of other languages, and from teaching English pronunciation for a while now, is that, like, I maybe have mentioned it here and there, I don't know, in a video or two, but without, really saying, hey, English is a really open mouth language. The vowels, there's more space in the mouth and this and that. If you're using the minimal pairs and you're really trying to use micro adjustments and shadow and say, okay, how do I get this sound a bit better, you'll start to notice, oh, hey, for me to go to e to I notice that there's a little bit more space in my mouth. So that means you're on the right track. You're paying attention. Okay. And you're naturally going to realize these things, and then that is going to improve your English. Okay. It's sort of a natural consequence of doing the type of work that I'm telling you guys to do. And I can't do that work for you, right? I can give you resources and pointers and explain things, but you are the guys and girls, you're the people who have to actually feel what's happening with your tongue and make the little changes and put in the work and the effort. So it's all in your hands. And that's true for generally pretty much everything you learn if it's a skill. Skills cannot really be taught. So I don't really actually consider myself an English teacher. That's why I call myself an American English guide. I call myself a teacher, for simplicity. But I don't say, hi, I'm Josh, you're an American English teacher. No, I say I'm your American English guide because I'm trying to guide you guys on the right path, but you have to put the work in. I can't do that for you. Okay, maybe my ear is or ears are. Either way is fine in this particular context. Getting used to the sounds. Yeah, probably. Um, oh yeah, there you go, ears, because I have two. Yeah, in this context, you can actually say ear because literally, like, yes, you have two ears, and we're talking about your hearing, right? Your ability to perceive the difference. But when we're talking about pronunciation, in the context of pronunciation, you can refer to my ear in the singular, which isn't, it is still referring to obviously your ear or your ears, but it's kind of a slightly different way that sounds more like it's pointing to your ability to perceive the sound rather than actually pointing to your physical ears, which in this case obviously there's not much difference, so you can say either one. um, but yeah, okay. This is a whirlwind of live stream. We're already like what, just over an hour in, and I just feel like I've been talking the whole time. Yeah, so the big lesson that's coming up, I shared a picture on Patreon of some notes that I took, some graphics that I made, and I'm gonna have to show that to you guys because I was trying to explain this to some other people, and without the graphic, it was really hard for them to follow. But with the graphic, which will be in the lesson, it's a lot easier to understand what I'm talking about. Can you tell us about how was the process of one of your students that went from proficient to near native? Okay, can you tell us about? There's a correction here. Can you tell us about? So you can either say, "Can you tell us about the process?" Not how was the process, or like, "Can you tell us about how one of your students went from without the that?" You kind of have like a mixed mixed grammar pieces here. That's okay though. It's understandable. And I know because you speak Spanish, like that seems kind of like it's coming from a Spanish perspective of how to use grammar. um, yeah, like the story. The story. Which story? Okay, well, I'll come back to that. I'm going to mention this big lesson because I've people are now officially Elmy is asking about it, so um, it's a slightly different thing. But so I'll give the idea to you here. I still need to work out some details. I was hoping to get this lesson made this week. It's already Thursday. Um, and if I started recording the lesson, I could definitely get it up, by Sunday. Well, I mean, depending on how much I have to record. I don't want to make it like super, super long necessarily, but there's going to be a lot of information. It's probably going to come next week because there's some details that I still have to work out, and it's the idea is there, the core of the idea, but I need to figure out some other things, like how to make it more immediately useful rather than just cool knowledge. But this deals with two essential things in pronunciation. We're talking about the range and quality of a sound. Okay. Now, this does directly impact the flow of sounds, how sounds flow into each other inside of a word, between words. So we have linking. It's all connected to that. It's also connected to the stress because that's going to affect some of the quality in various ways depending on the sound. So all of the areas of English pronunciation that we know about, sounds, linking, and stress, the rhythm, and all that stuff, all of that is tied up in this. But this lesson and what I'm going to be talking about now is really specifically focused mostly on the sounds. I will give you guys some examples of how it sort of affects the other areas, but this is the core idea. And the linking and stress brings in other elements that we don't need to understand right away. We need to get the basic idea first. Now, unfortunately, I do have to use the restroom really quick. So if you'll excuse me one moment. And we're back. Just like that, back from outer space. So, the range and quality of a sound. Now, for some people, maybe even for a lot of people, that's one of my worries about this lesson, that it might not be particularly popular because for a lot of people, it might seem too technical. But all the people I've talked about this so far to, they think that it's a good idea, it's useful information, but it is quite technical. And generally, I try to avoid things that are super, super technical unless they're really useful. And I think this idea, especially if you're trying to sound natural, this is a super useful idea. And this probably happens in all languages to an extent, but I think it really goes crazy in English because we have so many rules and exceptions and crazy things that can happen. But okay, let's start with vowels, because vowels are the easiest way to introduce this idea, and the easiest way to visualize it. So what we're going to have here, I'll go ahead and show you this. So this would be an example in English where we have e, I, the first three vowels, and then this would be Spanish where you have e, and it's not the same e as English. It's actually the start of the diphthong a in terms of this strict IPA symbol, but it's close enough, so that's fine. Now, you'll notice that there's the dot, and then there's a circle around the dot. So if you think of the vowel chart, and you see the dots on the vowel chart, those are, which we know the vowel charts aren't 100% like pinpoint perfect accurate. Like it's okay, that's the point essentially, right? If you look on the Spanish IPA chart for the vowel chart with the IPA, that first sound E is the same symbol, but it's moved slightly forward. So compared to Spanish, it's like, okay, yeah, but if I say in English E, it's probably not going to be noticed because it's so similar. It's actually the same sound, it's just a slightly different position. So there's the dot itself, which you could say would be like more or less pinpoint. And then there's an area around that. And as long as you don't get to the line between the area around one sound, the range around one sound, and the range around the other sound, the next sound below it, as long as you don't get on that line, then a native speaker will interpret it as this sound or this sound. Okay. And I think that's pretty obvious. Like that makes sense. Like obviously you don't have to get 100% perfect accuracy for E. Now, in reality, in the mouth, we're talking about super small spaces. So I draw a space like that, like a circle like that. And it's like, oh, okay, so I have some space to move around. Technically, yes, but it's a very small space to move around, right? Because your mouth is small. It's not the biggest area in the world. And so relatively, yes, you have a range around it, but don't think that means that you can just be super, super lazy with your sounds, okay? Now, I like using Spanish as an example because since Spanish doesn't have the second sound in English, I have heard, and I probably mentioned this to you guys before, I have heard quite a few times, especially in songs, where a Spanish speaker will use that second vowel sound in English. To my ears, I perfectly crystal clear hear eh, not e, not eh, eh. And like the word sin, which means without. So many times I've heard people say sin, which is the English word sin, related etymologically, but different meaning. And that's possible because guess what? The range in Spanish between this sound and this sound, there's nothing in between. So you can be less accurate with this sound or with this sound. And depending on the word, it's going to be interpreted one way or the other. I haven't really noticed when I hear the second vowel, it's supposed to be the sound here. It's usually almost always this sound. So maybe it's not quite, they sort of shift in between. But this E compared to the English, which has to be more accurate because there are three sounds here in the same space, more or less. Spanish doesn't have to be as accurate with that first sound. And so if they drop down into it's just going to be interpreted most likely as an E. And nobody will really notice, because Spanish speakers' brains, some people, yes, they'll still have maybe a natural talent for it. They might notice it, but for the most part, the average Spanish speaker probably won't even notice, if they haven't been exposed to, sufficient English or trained their ears. They won't notice that the person is actually saying this sound in English, okay? Because the brain filters it to be this sound. Um, it's like a safe zone to keep the same sound, and each sound has different safe spaces. You could think of it that way, yeah. Now, again, be careful, because a key part of this idea, right? It's not just range. That's the area around the sound. It's also the quality. The closer you get to this pinpoint, the clear, more perfect, more properly enunciated the sound will be. E, eh, ah, right? And that's fine. If you get a little too far, right, the farther away you move from that center dot, the less it's going to be clear and technically properly pinpoint accurate, and that's okay, because in real life speech, speakers are in the range. Okay, we're more or less, towards that dot, but obviously we're not going to hit it every time. We're not a machine. We're not a robot. But we get close enough that the listener will interpret it as this sound or this sound or this sound. In most cases, obviously, sometimes your tongue slips, your brain, goes a little weird or whatever. You mix some sounds up. That can happen, but usually no. If you get to the line here, that's the point where a native speaker won't be able to tell which sound you're saying. And this is something that I commonly experienced teaching students over the last years, especially between the first two sounds. And so E and I, because a lot of languages, for the people that I've taught, they don't have that second vowel. And between E and A, because again, they don't have A, they might have A, which is a little farther back, but they don't have A. Those are common problems. And you have to figure out where that line is. Okay. Now, this is useful information, because this, number one, it gives you a visual and a mental model to understand what's going on in any language's vowels. But it also allows you to say, okay, this is how the sound is supposed to sound. Can I make that as close and clear as possible, as it should be, ideally? That's your first goal, right? You're trying to train your tongue, use little micro adjustments to get as close to that dot as possible, okay, based on what you're hearing someone say, depending on the language, right? Okay, so once you get that, then before that, as you're trying to find that dot, right, you probably won't be able to hear it at first. So it'll take some practice. It'll take some feedback, saying, "Oh no, a native." If I were your teacher and I hear you say, "Oh yeah, it sounds like it's on the line," okay, then you say, "Okay, so it's right here, and I need to go up." Okay, or if you say like the word "see," but I hear "se," that's clearly way too far down. It's not even on the line. It's just the wrong sound. And you still know that for the word "see," you need to go up. Okay, so there's something off with, maybe we already talked about the openness of your jaw. It doesn't have to open all that much, but with the tongue, or it could even be the shape of the tongue. Because remember, the thing that the vowel chart doesn't tell you, it doesn't tell you the other details. The point is the most important, right? Is it the front part of the tongue, middle, or the back? And how high or low is it? That's the most important information that you need. But some sounds, like the right, it usually feels pretty tight, right? Where the schwa sound, it usually feels more relaxed. The E, I noticed, it's not just like you're here. In my mouth, it feels kind of like this, like there's this little curve at the front. And depending on if you're like this, like if I say E, 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 it sounds like an E, but it sounds like a different E. Like it's not an English E, right? Just by making my tongue more flat instead of this little curve. I hope I put that in the E lesson. I'm pretty sure I did. I made that a long time ago. But so there are other little details that you need to be aware of, and I try to give you guys those details so you don't have to go find them yourselves. But once you have those details, then you need to experiment with exactly, the getting inside the range and making sure that you're not too close to the line between sounds. Um, Maybe that's why I can say the words sit and hit perfectly, but I can't pronounce the I vowel on its own. Possibly. Possibly. That could either be a that because that happens sometimes. I've had some students where in a word or maybe outside of a word, um, they can do the sound perfectly, but then if you take it out of the word or put it into the word, depending on which one we're talking about, they can't say it anymore. Usually, it's when if it's in isolation, they can manage to say it, but if it's not, then they can't. Sometimes what happens is, and I think this is probably in your case, this is the most likely explanation. It might not be. Usually when this happens, it's because your actually isn't perfect. But when you put other sounds around it, that sort of hides the position and makes it close enough to where it gets interpreted to be really good sounding. Um, and so actually, you might not be quite as perfect as you think. I don't know if I checked your I vowel. I probably did. And I probably said it was fantastic in words. So I don't know. The other explanation there would be um, that in those words, it is indeed perfect, but you're not used to doing the sound in isolation because in reality, the I sound is almost never used by itself. Like the schwa is commonly used by itself, right? The word a, or if I'm thinking, whatever it is. Um, but the it's almost always in a word, pretty much always, like 99.9% of the time. Because it is not a word by itself; it's just a sound. So it could be that in the flow of a word, like you're able to accurately mimic and say, oh, okay, yeah, like you hit the right spot, or at least sufficiently in the range. But then when you go to just the vowel sound, um, you don't have the proper muscle memory to go directly into that position that you usually pass by inside of a word. That could happen. It's a weird thing, but it could happen. Um, and that just means that you're really good at mimicking, which is fantastic. It's fantastic. It's a good skill to have. Um, you have, yeah, heard, of course, you corrected that. You have heard me saying it and is, haven't you? I believe so. I don't remember. I've listened to a couple different recordings from you, from some other people, and then of course, like I've worked with students and this. And I forget exactly who I've heard say what, um, but I think so. Yeah, if I remember correctly, I said either you sounded perfectly fine or almost perfectly fine. I don't really remember. I have to go back and check the Patreon messages, but um, I can go back and review that if you want and send you a message about that later as well. But um, either way, if you can't produce the it vowel on its own, there is some sort of problem there. It helps to know what the exact problem is, but at the end of the day, you just have to practice going directly into the it position. Um, but as I said, it's not really used by itself necessarily. And so it's probably not that big of a problem. But it may be slightly affecting your actual speech. Like maybe when you focus on a word sit or hit, maybe it comes out perfectly. But when you're speaking, who knows? Maybe like, uh, I sit on the table or I hit the ball or whatever it is. Maybe in the flow of a sentence, it doesn't quite come out so perfectly. Could be. Um, so there's all kinds of strange things that could happen. But the point here is that there's a range for every vowel. And depending on the vowels that you have in your language, those ranges might be bigger or smaller, relatively speaking, to what other native speakers would interpret as a particular sound. And then this makes perfect sense that when you come to learn English, and if you don't have a sound here, your brain, unless maybe you have a little bit of natural talent, which helps, most people's brains, they won't hear the sound at all. Um, which is one reason why people underestimate the value of pronunciation and ear training. They think it's so obvious. Of course, language is made of sounds. We don't even think about that. It's not a thought that occurs. You just try to start speaking the language. Maybe you find, okay, it's hard to do the R, it's hard to do certain things, but people don't realize the value of saying, hey, my language does not have this sound. I need to train my brain to, at the very least, be able to hear the sound, right? You don't have to have perfect pronunciation if you don't want to. It's possible and takes a lot of work the higher you want it to go closer to a native. But at least you should be able to hear, because if you open your ears, it's going to help you open up the entire language, even as a beginner. You just need to then, now you can hear the sounds, you just need to learn the words, right? And what the words refer to. So this is so immensely valuable in a number of ways, just this concept. Now that's vowels, okay? The consonants, I think, are the most valuable part, because this vowel idea here, it's like, okay, yeah, maybe you never thought about that, but I think it makes sense. If you think about it long enough, you'll probably start to realize, oh, hey, yeah, there's space between these. We can say there's kind of an area around them where it sounds okay. I don't think that's groundbreaking. That's not something super like, wow, amazing. But what I've found for the consonants, especially the stop consonants, which is the most interesting part, I think that this is um, enlightening, we'll say. Now, there is a couple of other different variations in special cases, which I can come back to later. But let's first talk about regular consonants. And I haven't fully analyzed all the consonants. It just seems that there's a clear, not a difference, but there are two categories, two broad categories that I notice right off the bat, which is stop sounds and non-stop sounds, so other consonant sounds. So let's take, for example, the S sound. Okay. Now, if we have the S sound, this sound might be slightly different between languages. I know, for example, the SH, I didn't notice it at first until later it was pointed out to me. The SH in Japanese is more like, where the SH in English is more like shh, shh, shh. And I might be a little off on the Japanese one because details. I never took the time to master it. I was just like, oh yeah, that's true. I started to hear the difference because I was doing some research at one point. But these are things that you won't notice, especially for the consonants. For the vowels, obviously, if you don't have a particular vowel sound, you probably won't notice it anyway because you don't hear it, but then you're going to have trouble understanding. And you're like, why did these sound the same? Aren't they supposed to be pronounced different? And you say, oh, because they're different sounds and I don't hear them. Where with the consonants, many of the consonants in English are shared in many languages. And like the S sound, I think, many languages, maybe even all languages, I don't know, have an S sound. But where is the exact position and quality of that S sound, right? What's the range of position for that S sound? And at the end of the day, the consonants don't cause as much problems, because if you have an S in your language and it's just slightly different than the S in English, it's probably not going to really be noticed. It might make you sound not quite it might make you sound like you have a little bit of an accent that is like, okay, it doesn't quite sound like a native speech, but those are the super, super small details that, you can worry about later to really tie up your accent. The muscle memory thing makes a lot of sense. Probably in order to say the I vowel sound, it's easier to think about the it word and then drop the T. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Like, don't even do a stop T. Just, there's no sound there. It's I. So if you can say it perfectly well, or is perfectly well, or in perfectly well, just drop the consonant sound. And that's actually, depending on if you're trying to go from the vowel to adding sounds to it, or going from the sounds to trying to isolate the vowel, that's a very good technique to use, right? Take an anchor, right? A word that you can say well, and use that as a reference for other sound combinations. Like I have one student who, when we were learning the high schwa, the sound like good or book, I call it the high schwa. His anchor word that he can usually most of the time say consistently well and like pretty much perfect, good, good, good. He when he goes to say another word like book, we notice he has a little bit of problems with the lip sound plus the high schwa. And so he's trying to find that same position with like good, but put a B in front of it instead of a G. And these are the little things. They're called anchor points, so that when you're making your little changes and trying to do new combinations of sounds, like we were talking about with the clusters, you have some reference that you know is good, and you're just trying to manipulate what's around it. Yes. So reference points are super, super useful. Anchors, reference points, whatever you want to call them. I think I in one of the early pronunciation lessons, I talked a bit about that. Don't worry, I'm going to be talking more about techniques. I know I've been talking just a lot about sounds, and for the most part, um, there's more information coming, such as this. Uh, but I'm really trying to get the sounds done because we have like 50 sounds, like 52 sounds or whatever. It's ridiculous. Anyway, um, things. Okay, so if we talk about the S sound, right? In English, it's supposed to be nice and clear. It's like a whistle, right? Almost like you're, but without your lips, right? Has that sort of whistle quality. Um, so looking at that S, um, when we talk about the range and quality of consonants, we're going to use a slightly different image. Okay, we're not going to do a dot with a circle around it. If we're talking about the exact position, just like the physical position in the mouth, technically yes, there is still a dot with a circle around it, and that does apply to the consonants when we're talking about that aspect of the consonant. But there are other aspects which also affect the vowels, um, and it creates this continuum, this sort of number line almost. Make sure you guys see this right. I know my handwriting is horrible, but we start at one end, which is the fully enunciated and strong version. Okay. Now we're not talking about stop sounds yet, so just ignore that. Don't even think about stop sounds. A strong version. Okay, there's three qualities of every sound, vowels and consonants. There's three qualities, but especially consonants. There's the speed, which will affect the duration. The length or duration isn't exactly the same as speed, but obviously they're directly related. They're kind of the same thing in a way. That gets a little bit more into like stress and unstress and that problem in English. Just set that aside. We're just talking about the speed. So if I say s or s, right, one is sort of longer. You can say it's pronounced more slowly. So we get sort of a longer sound there. Okay, so there's the speed. That's one aspect of the quality. Okay. Another aspect of the quality is the exact position. Okay. So there is a more or less perfect pinpoint position for every consonant in each language, and in each language, right? As I said, the S or the SH or the F or whatever it is might have a slightly different position in that language, but it still sounds almost like the same sound between languages. So that's something to keep in mind. In your language, your S might be a little bit different in the exact position. And the last quality that I've identified that is super important, maybe there's more, is I can never keep all three of these in my mind at the same time. Hold on, what was it? Speed. I need to write them down because I didn't actually write the qualities down. There's the speed, the exact position, and come on, what is it? It's right there. Speed. Oh, come on. This is embarrassing. So this is why I should prepare. Every time that I've explained this, I always have trouble remembering all three, but the third one comes to me immediately. And right now it's not, probably because I'm on a camera talking to a bunch of people, even though there's only 5 of you here. What is it? Come on, this is stupid. Laziness, clarity, speed. By the way, yeah, who all are here? Yeah, I think you meant here instead of H. um, Yeah, it'd be nice to know everybody who's here. I mean, you don't have to comment if you just want to remain anonymous. That's fine. Yeah, okay, so I won't freak out and be like, oh my God, I need to think of it now. Let's see. There's the speed, the exact position, And let's see. Can't think. Oh, the force of air, which you can think of also as the volume. Okay, so the force of air slash volume. Okay. See, that one's just so obvious. That's why I keep forgetting it. Because obviously you have to, whether it's voiced or voiceless, you have to push out a certain amount of breath in order for the sound to be heard, right? Um, who all are joining us for Skype meeting? Well, I don't know. I know Elmy said that he wants to attend. You want to attend, but I haven't heard from anybody else. I do have one person that I can ask. I don't know if they've seen the Patreon yet. And they might be able to attend, but I know that they're also really busy these days. So maybe. I mean, maybe we could just do it with you too. I mean, I really prefer for there to be a certain number of people because I mean it's Patreon, it's like a group thing, and you know, I want to give all of you guys benefit instead of just like one or two people. So um, maybe we'll just do it with you two because I know you really want to do that Skype meeting setup or Skype meeting setup. I say Skype meetup seedant. There we go. um, so maybe we'll just do it with you two. Oh, it doesn't matter if your English isn't good. That's fine. That's why we practice. um, but hopefully we can find one more person. That would be ideal. We'll see. We'll see. We'll just stay tuned to Patreon. By Saturday, my time, which is a couple days, I'll let you know for sure if we have a person or not, and we'll see what happens. But um, so and then Byron said loudness. Yes. So when we're talking about the force of air or volume, we're essentially talking about the loudness. Um, and I didn't see you type that. I don't know if you typed that right before I remembered. So we maybe thought of it at the same time. Um, Elmi says water, fire, earth, air, avatar. Yes. What about that? What? Are you thinking because like the force of air? So there's like air bending. Is that what we're talking about now? uh, I'm cool. I'll be the avatar. I'll be your avatar teacher, right? Uh, so anyway, these are the three qualities. I don't know why I just put that down because I have to show this to you guys, but those are the three qualities. Okay, we have the speed, which is directly related to sort of the duration of the sound, the length of the sound, the exact position, and the force of air or volume or loudness of it. Yeah, Josh, we talked about this last Tuesday. Okay, no, we didn't. We did not. Okay, there is a possibility because I'm exploring the possibility of me having ADHD, and it is possible that I completely forgot that. But I don't think we talked. I think maybe we talked a bit about that in some way, but not in the way that I'm talking about here. Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, yeah, because I was answering some questions, and this lesson and these diagrams are a direct result of me thinking about the things that I was talking about last time. So yes, you're correct. Technically, we did kind of talk about this, but we didn't have this image or this, complete idea. So if you were here last time, then this sounds familiar. Good. For those who weren't here last time, or who are watching in the live in the replay, now you know these are the three qualities. Okay, maybe there's more. I haven't identified them. I still have to figure out some details here, but this is the basic idea. Okay, now if we go back to our thingy here, I'm trying to see. This is so hard to see. Yeah. Okay, so we have. You said something because I'm one of your students. Well, yes, maybe, possibly, you could be. um, all right. Distractions. My brain is not working. So, as I was saying, on the one end, we have the fully clearly enunciated sound, sort of the proper, nice and good sound. So, oh, Juan, there you go. Thanks for pointing that out. I don't know if you mentioned that in class. I don't think so. If you did, I don't remember. There are things I just don't, my brain just doesn't hold on to. But anyway, yeah, okay, good to know. I'm glad that you're joining us. Because I've seen Byron Lord comment a number of times, uh, if I remember right, on videos and stuff. And so, yeah, okay, good. Anyway, that's back to this. Okay, so Juan already knows about this because that's what you mean by last time. Talk about last class. Yeah, that's right. So there's the fully clearly enunciated sound, the strong sound. Okay, again, not worried about stop sounds, just regular. So if we take the S sound, for example, if we have, not super fast, we have nice, good air quality, air force, right? And the position is more or less perfect, right? Okay, that's a nice, clear sound, right? In reality, of course, we're never going to say so, right? Nobody speaks like that. But that would be the ideal, perfect, thing. Okay. And you should be able to do that. That's what most teachers focus on. That's what they tend to emphasize, especially because, as I said in the Elsa review, I think most teachers don't think it's possible for you to develop a native or near native accent. And so, uh, they just say, okay, well, this is the clear way to pronounce it. Like, you want to get as close as you can to this. And yes, communication, being understood, is the primary goal, first of all, but that doesn't mean that you can't refine and get closer and closer, with more practice. And most teachers just stop there. They're like, well, that doesn't matter. You don't have to sound perfect, so let's not teach you all these little fine details that you need mechanically. So when you go from the fully clearly enunciated sound to the opposite end of the spectrum, right? What's at the other end? Well, it would be no sound at all, right? The dropped sound. Now, this needs certain circumstances, certain conditions. Okay, you can't just drop a consonant sound. If I say so, I can't drop the S because then it's just O, right? That's not the right word. But an example I like to give is, but why? Okay. Um, and again, we're not focused so much on the stop sounds, but this is a good example of a drop, okay? Because by default, most likely this T would probably be a stop T, but why? Okay. However, especially in faster speech, we can just drop that T in this particular case with this particular word. But why? But why? So I'm not even stopping it. I'm going from to w, right? That's possible. It's not informal necessarily. It's just a fast way to speak. It doesn't even necessarily have to be fast, right? Because we have the three qualities. Now, speed is sort of a special factor that can actually warp sounds, sort of like change them in a special way or create certain blending between words that don't normally happen. Speed is a whole other topic of special things that can possibly happen, and we're not going to worry too much about that right now. The point is that the faster you go and or the less pinpoint accurate you are and or the less or more air force you have, the less air force you have will move you towards increasingly towards not hearing the sound at all. So it becomes less and less clear based on those three factors. And these are all dynamic. So it could be really fast, but maybe the position is perfect. You know, this is why it gets a little technical. Okay. You don't have to really worry about that, and don't make it more complicated than it has to be. These are just the factors that could make it less clear in actual, real, natural speech. And there was one more thing I wanted to, yeah, this is also related to lazy speech, right? When we're just kind of a little lazy and, sometimes we have to hit the proper sound, right? Like we were talking earlier, like he's and his, like maybe you could say he's the same as his. It doesn't sound too bad to me. It's not supposed to be that way. It wouldn't normally be that way, but maybe, right? If you're speaking really fast, or just really lazily, I suppose it's possible, but you can't just always do that with all the sounds because obviously you're going to be all over the place and we're not going to be able to understand you at all, right? So that's why most teachers stay over on this side, the fully clear enunciated side, because that's the simplest and easiest thing. Just hit all the sounds as perfectly as you can, nice and strong force, not too fast. I mean, you can speak quickly, but don't, go a mile a minute. um, and people will understand you. Trying to learn how to move over here, how natives actually handle the language and how these three qualities affect real speech. Um, that is where things get a little bit more harder to teach, and they get a little bit more complicated because there's more information, it's more technical. And again, it's not as bad as it sounds. It's just when we're talking about this abstractly as a concept, it seems like, okay, what's going on? Like, I don't know. That's why I want to give you guys some examples like the S sound, or if we go the F sound, right? I think the F sound is a good example because if we have the bottom lip here, right? Um, and I think I talked about this in the F lesson. I should have. When we're using the bottom lip to touch these top teeth, and when that happens, we get the right, which is not, it's not a th sound. It's a common problem, but now depending on how your language does an f, like in Japanese, right? They don't even touch, and Japanese doesn't technically have an f. It's just when you're supposed to say h, the h sound and the u, that particular combination, they change it to what more or less sounds like an English f, but it's very weak. Hu, hu. Okay, because the lip is so close here, but it's not actually touching. And that actually is directly relevant to English. Because what happens if I'm being, pretty lazy or I'm speaking really quickly, one or more of these qualities are heading towards the less clear end. And I'm just speaking, I say, oh, it's a fire. It's a fire. It's a fire. Now that F is at the start of a stressed syllable, so that's going to make it more likely that it's a little bit clearer, it's a little bit louder. And you're going to hear it a little bit more, but it's not necessarily fire. There's a fire, right? But if I say, I don't know, he's laughing, laugh, right? I could say it that way. Ideally, right, you hit laughing, he's laughing, but I could maybe not quite get the lip pulled up as much, and then we're kind of more here, laughing, he's laughing. That's possible. It's not supposed to be that way, but if it comes out that way, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's still, that still sounds close enough to be an F sound. Okay. This is where it gets a little dangerous because you guys don't exactly know what's too much and what's, not enough or whatever. But that idea should make sense. If you spend some time thinking about your language and noticing how you naturally use the sounds compared to, ideally how they should be, because I think all natives have a model in their head of how the sounds should be clearly pronounced. You'll probably notice that you do some similar things, and it's not always pinpoint accurate. So again, that goes back to that range idea. So like for the F, as long as you're not too far outside of the range where it's just air, then you could be just close enough on the edge of that range. It will still be interpreted as an F. You just have to figure out where that range is, or you don't even have to worry about it if you don't want, and you can just always make sure it's closer than not. But we also know with the F, for example, or even with the S, if you get too closed, right? If you push too much, the air can't flow. Or with the S, right? So it goes both ways. You can get too closed, or you can get not close enough. In the flow of speech, obviously, we're going to tend to not get close enough rather than getting too close because that would be adding extra force, right? Which would be trying to make it even clearer. It just can't come out because it's too tight. So that's not something to really worry about for the most part. So fully clearly enunciated on one extreme, which is the ideal perfect sound, but we don't always hit. And then the completely dropped sound, which is an extreme that needs certain circumstances to trigger. You can't always just drop a sound. And everything in between. Okay, so the F could be right? They all sound like Fs. They're all close enough, right? And in my lessons, what I've been teaching you guys, especially because I wasn't completely aware of this exact scheme, consciously anyway, I've been teaching you guys, okay, you have to get accurate enough. This is, this and that, whatever. And that's definitely true. I think when you're initially learning the sounds, the way that, like how most teachers emphasize the clearly enunciated sound, that is the proper way to go first. right? But in actual speech, it doesn't always hit that ideal. So you need to be able to hit that ideal position. You need to learn that first so you know what is the proper perfect sounding sound. But then when you start shadowing and you start noticing these little details, oh, hey, that F is a little bit less clear here. So I don't have to, make it a perfectly nice, clear F. And maybe you don't even notice the difference, which is okay. But again, see, this is where I'm running into the problem where I'm trying to find ways to make this very easily useful and not just information that's interesting. That's one of the things I'm still trying to solve, and why I haven't actually made this lesson yet, because it's still too abstract at the moment. My solution to it is shadowing, especially slow to fast shadowing. But even if you don't know this, that's still going to help you. This is just sort of like a part of that can give you more insight into what you hear. Okay. And I have in the middle here, so we have, with the fully clearly enunciated sound, there's the strong version, which, well, enough air. So there's the strong version, which is most likely to happen at the start of a stressed syllable, right? Whether it's the stop sound or not. With the stop sounds, we have certain conditions where, like, it has to be a strong T, it could be, it has to be a weak T, it has to be a stop T. Well, it has to, quote unquote, it's most likely to be a stop T. Where with the other consonant sounds, like an F is an F. If it's at the start of a stressed syllable, it's more likely that it's going to be pronounced with more force and more clearly. If it's in the middle of the word or at the end of a word, it should still be there, unless it's a special case we can drop it. But it doesn't have to be as clear, right? So if I say off, right, I don't have to say off. I can say off, off, off. It's still there. Maybe with my mic, you guys can't quite hear it. I don't know, but it is there. So it should be audible, should be there, should be pronounced, not dropped, unless there's a special case to drop it. But it's like a weak version, right? Now, when we get up to the stop sounds, this is where it gets really, really interesting, and where I think it's particularly useful. Even if you don't use this for the regular consonants, it is super, super useful immediately, I think, for the stop sounds. Now, we know that there are different kinds of, or different versions of each of the stop sounds. So, like, we have the P, where we have the strong P, we have the weak P, we have the stop P, and potentially you could drop a P. It depends. Again, we need the right circumstances. You can't just go around dropping P's, but or T's or whatever it is. But it is technically a possibility. But distinct from the other consonant sounds, we do have these three core qualities, or not qualities, these three core versions or types: strong, weak, and stop, where other consonants don't have a stop because physically, mechanically, they're not required. They're not part of the sound. And with the strong and weak version for other consonants, it's really just sliding on the continuum. There is no specific weak version. It's just not fully clear. Okay. Where with the stop sounds, there's actually a defined strong version and there's a defined weak version. So with P, yeah, with P, if I say pick, right? Now I am trying to clearly enunciate that P. Even the strong P, it doesn't always have to be 100% clearly enunciated. It can slide a little bit, especially if I'm speaking quickly, right? If I say pick it up, pick it up. It kind of, okay, I don't particularly hear a lot of air force there, but compared to saying happy, happy. See, that sounds like an even weaker weak P. So we're seeing that the speed will make the strong P sound a little weaker and the weak P sound a little weaker. So again, we're talking about how the speed, that quality of the speed affects that, the strong or the weak. But relatively, a strong P is still a strong P, even if it's not perfectly clearly enunciated, and a weak P is a weak P, okay? And there's actual lines, unlike for these sounds, right? I just put a line randomly here. It doesn't have to be there. It's anywhere in here. Where for the stop sounds, we actually have specific defined lines, and you can make them a little bit weaker, relatively, but they're more or less fixed where they're supposed to be based on if it's stressed, not stressed, or where you could possibly stop it, like at the end of a word or something. From now on, I won't pronounce any P sound. Yeah. And here we can make a joke out of this. Hold your pee. Your bladder will eventually explode if you do that. So I recommend you do pronounce your p's. Anyway, I think because this idea isn't directly taught, like I've never heard anybody talk about this. Again, I don't follow a bunch of English teachers. I don't like, watch, oh, what are their, all their techniques and stuff. So maybe somebody has thought of something like this before and talked about it. I don't know. Maybe formally in linguistics, they've discovered this. I don't know. But instead of saying, okay, we have this type of P or T or whatever, we have this type of P or T, we have this type of P or T, it sounds like, okay, they're disconnected, right? Like they're kind of connected because they share the same position, but it's like they're not logically like on a spectrum, right? It's like, what's up with this stop P? It's like you're not even pushing out a P, so is it really even a P sound? Technically, yes. And so this actually gives us a continuum. Now, this is for T and D because we have the extra weak version, which is the flapped D. But this also explains, like I say, that there's the first weak version and then the second weak version that actually logically fits right on my spectrum, which is fantastic. There's also the two stop sounds, the glottal stop and the regular stop. We're going to talk about that as well. I haven't on this channel made a distinction yet between glottal stop and non-glottal stop because I don't think it's a useful distinction for a number of reasons, and it's ultimately related to this. I just wasn't consciously aware of this spectrum. So let's talk about all this, okay? Again, at the other end of the extreme, we have the complete drop sound. I think T, of all the possible sounds in English that could drop, I think T is probably the one that does it most often. Like I just said, often. There's supposed to be a T there. That's a special case where it's actually at the start of a syllable and we can drop it. Very special case. Very, very special case. Usually it's not, it's at the end of a word or end of a syllable. But anyway, that aside, if we look at, we're going to look at this from the perspective of P and then from the perspective of T and D. So if we look at it from the perspective of P, we have the fully clear, strong enunciated sound. And as I said, you can make it a little less clear by speaking faster. You can make it a little less clear by, not quite pushing out as much air, but enough to where it's still strong. We still, have some force of air there. Or what was the third quality? See, I always forget it. Oh no, exact position. So we're talking about how Spanish speakers, like you say estaba, right? They may not say estaba, they say estaba, estaba, blah, 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 and they do it very lightly. If I say, I don't know, probably at the start of an unstressed syllable because it's going to be weaker. Okay, well, happy, happy, happy. See, I can do the same thing. I don't think this would happen at the start of a stressed syllable because it needs to be nice and strong. We need to actually like push it out. But if I say instead of happy, happy, be, where what makes it weak is just there's not really any air there. It's just beep, beep, beep. I could very lightly touch happy, 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 happy. And it sounds like a P because it's already a weak P. It's just now a little bit weaker because I'm being a little less accurate with the position. So that can happen in English too. Not all the time necessarily, but it can. So we see our same three qualities affect the stop sounds, but they affect them only to a certain extent because we have these particular points where it would become a different kind, a different version of that sound, right? Like a strong P to a weak P. Okay, let's talk about the T and D, specifically the T. Okay, so if we have a nice strong T at the start of a stressed syllable, doesn't matter if it's in the middle of a word or not, like time or attack. This needs to be a nice, good, clear T. Okay, T. Close your tongue, push it out. It's not dental. T. Okay, And that has a very crisp sound to it. That's the strong T. Now, if I'm speaking quickly and I say, I don't have time, I don't have time, I don't have time. Okay, so you're not hearing time because of the speed, because of, whatever. I think speed is really the biggest factor here. And that's okay, because the speed naturally makes things just a little bit less clear. And so that's okay. That happens very, very naturally. But it's not a weak T, right? I'm not saying I don't have time. I don't have time. Because by trying to do a weak T, I'm actually making the word time unstressed. You can't actually hear the word time, right? Where if I say "ta," preposition, or not T, to, but reduce it to "ta," you can very easily say like "ta, ta, ta, ta," because it's already really small by itself. So you can make that weaker because we don't need as much force in the first place. So you don't have to, yeah, anyway, you know what I mean? My brain is not working. I think I need water. I have water down there. Okay, now we go to the weak version. So we know we have the nice strong T, which can become a little bit weaker. Okay, we go to the weak T. Like if we say totality, that is not spelled right. There we go. Totality. The middle T there is a strong T because it's the start of a stressed syllable. The last T is actually a flapped D because it's weak and it's between two vowel sounds. But the first T is just a regular first weak T. It's not totality, right? We hear a bit of a difference. It's a small difference with the T. It's harder to hear the difference, but it's totality, ta, ta, ta. Okay, so there's just more force of air there, basically. With the T, the difference in actual sound between the weak version and the strong version is harder to hear than with a lot of the other stops, just because of the nature of producing the T sound in the mouth in English. But we do notice there's a little bit of a difference there, mainly force of air. Then we have, I see somebody left, this got too technical. Then we have the weak T. Now I called this the second weak T even before I was conscious of this image spectrum, because it's like another way to make the T weak, right? Or if it's a D, if it's actually a D that's becoming a flapped D, it's another way to make the D weak. Now, at first, I wasn't quite sure where to put this, but I thought about it and I was like, okay, this is actually going to be a slightly less clear version of the first weak one. And why? It actually makes perfect sense. If you do a nice, clear, fully enunciated T, you go into the T position, you push it out, nice, good air, T. If you do a weak T, the first weak T, you go into the T position, okay, you're still pushing the air out. Everything is the same. It's just not as much force. It's not as strong. Okay. But then with the flapped D, right, which whether it's written with a T or a D, it becomes a flapped D in English, or in American English. So when it becomes a flapped D, what happens is we're not even taking the time to close and push the sound out. We're just flowing through the word and we're just tapping and moving on our way. So that's an even weaker form compared to actually fully closing and pushing the sound out, right? And it might not seem obvious at first that a flapped D would be a weaker form of the original weak T or D, but it actually makes perfect sense. I don't know if you guys agree with me or not. To me, it makes perfect sense. Especially because I'm not taking the time to actually close the position. I'm just tapping it and going. So it's immediately like a slightly less clear version, which of course the T becoming a D sound obviously radically changes the quality. That's a special change that happens. But if we're talking D, weak D to regular D, D versus R, obviously it's like a weaker D still than compared to the regular weak D. Okay, then we have the stops. The stops. And this is where it gets even more interesting. This is my favorite part. So we have, what did I put there? Oh yeah. So we have a regular stop, a glottal stop. And that's usually when I say stop, I usually mean a glottal stop. I don't really make a distinction. It doesn't necessarily have to be glottal, but it doesn't matter. Okay. Then we have the non-glottal stop. And as I put an arrow to here, I don't know if you could read that. It's like a faster or lazier glottal stop. And I know other teachers, because I've seen some videos here and there of people have asked me about it, because they're like, well, what's this stop? Like, is as different from a glottal stop? They say it's not the same. Technically, yes, it's not the same. So first, let's figure out what's the difference here. A glottal stop, which I've taught you guys, is where you go into the position for the sound. T, of course, you don't have to actually go into the position. It's the one special case. But right with P, we know we have to go into the P position. Otherwise, it's not going to be a P sound. So normally you go into the position for that sound physically with your mouth. And then instead of actually saying the sound, you're going to cut off the air here. And the combination of that, the position of your mouth, your lips or your tongue, right? The position of your mouth combined with that cutoff, that clear cut of air, which actually makes it sound like the sound before it gets cut, right? If I say that, but I do a glottal stop T, that, instead of that. All right, that would be the difference between no stop and a stop, right? So this, in terms of an actual sound, like a p or a t, it's obviously much farther down the spectrum, almost towards dropped, because we're not actually making the sound itself. But if you compare a regular stop to a glottal stop has a clear cutoff. So relatively, it's more clear and more enunciated than a non-glottal stop, because a non-glottal stop, all you do is you go into the position, but you don't actually close the air off. You just kind of let your voice fall, disappear. So instead of saying that, where I clearly cut it off, that, I'm going to say that. And you probably don't even notice a difference there. Even for me, I hardly notice a difference there. The reason why this matters at all is because in the flow of speech, we don't always take the time to do a full cut-off glottal stop, because it actually breaks the flow of speech. There are times when that's appropriate to actually fully break it, and when we do that. But if you're speaking a little bit faster, you don't want to take the time to stop. If you're, speaking just generally a little less clearly, a little more lazily, you might not take the time to actually fully cut off that air. So you still go into the position, so there's the illusion of the sound like it's going to be pronounced, but it's not a clear stop because you don't hear the cutoff. So that would mean that a normal stop that's not glottal is actually a weaker version of a full glottal stop, because there's no clear cutoff. And then the next step would be a complete drop. Okay. So when we're saying but why, going back to that example, another point that you've probably heard me say before is the fully enunciated sound, right? The fully pronounced sound is always technically possible, right? Regardless of the rule. In the word but, the rule, right, what would most likely happen, because it's at the end of a word, right? If it's in isolation, just the word but, it's supposed to be a stop, whether a regular stop or a glottal stop. It's supposed to be a stop. That's the rule, okay? And that's what's most likely to happen. The standard thing, right? But it's always possible that I could push out a nice clear T for whatever reason. For whatever reason, maybe I'm enunciating the word or whatever. It might just come out that way. That's possible too. But it's a lot less likely that it would be a fully enunciated T sound, because of the circumstances of where that T is. It's at the end of well, it's not, it doesn't matter if it's stressed or not, but it's at the end of a word. And it's not connecting to anything. But why? So I can do a clear glottal stop cutoff, right? Well, let's start at the fully enunciated side. So I could say but why? Unlikely, not common, but possible. Always possible. but why? If you go maybe to a weaker T where I just don't push it out as much, but why? But why? Right? It's just not but why. Okay. So it's just a weaker T. Now here we don't have the conditions to do a flapped D, so that doesn't even apply. You can't just change it to a flapped D because it's weaker. We would need the vowel sound before and the vowel sound after it for it to connect to. So in this case, doesn't have the circumstances for the flapped D. For the flapped T and D, which is just a D sound, and for the drop sounds, you really need the right circumstances. But otherwise, we fall somewhere on this spectrum. I could go to a full glottal stop, but why? It is a clear enunciated glottal stop, an enunciated stop, but why? I can do a non-glottal stop, but why? But why? But why? Okay. And you might even hear a tiny, tiny little bit of a T there because I'm not actually stopping it. I'm just trying to like get into position and then leave it. And that might, because I'm just keeping the airflow going as I move into Y, that might create a tiny little T. Okay. This is all still in that range of what's happening. But why? But why? But why? And then, of course, in this particular case, we do have the circumstances where I can actually drop it. So, but why? But why? So everything except for a flapped D can apply when you have these two words together. Which is, if you ask most teachers, they're going to say, well, we see the T at the end of the word. It's not connecting to anything. So it's going to be a stop T. And they'll just tell you that. Maybe if they're analyzing someone's speech, like I think I saw Rachel doing that before. I think some other teachers do that in some way. I don't really know. But maybe if they're doing that and they say, oh, okay, so this person in this case, they kind of push it out. Like maybe they'll acknowledge it in cases like that, but they don't really emphasize this stuff. They don't really teach this stuff to you guys in real lessons, as far as I know. Maybe I'm wrong. But then when you go out and you're listening to English and you're like, hey, sometimes I hear people say the T there. What's up with that? And you're asking me, and I'm like, well, in reality, from a native speaker knows that that's possible. It's just not likely, right? Because it's not likely, most teachers don't think that it's worth the time and effort to teach you, right? They just want you to say, okay, in this case, it's a stop, and memorize that it's supposed to be a stop, and just use a stop. Right? Or maybe use the fully clearly enunciated version and don't even worry about stops. Maybe some teachers teach that way, but why? I don't know. But in either case, well, I mean, in the first case, if you do always use a stop, you're still natural. It's just that's not the only option. It might come out a different way. So, but if they tell you not to never do a stop, just ignore stops because it's more complicated, then you're definitely not going to sound natural because stops are used all the time. Okay. And by stops, I mean glottal or not the sound, the type of sound. Okay, good. Now, I know that's abstract. I know that's a little complicated. I want to give you guys some examples because I do have a couple others instead of just but why. I have another example, and we can talk more about this if you want. But if you guys have any questions, or any feedback, is it useful? Is it not useful? Is it interesting? Is it boring? Is it too complicated? Because these are things I'm trying to figure out for when I actually teach the lesson, so that people don't start watching and then 1 minute later they're like, nope. Like notice I just said nope, and I pushed out that P, even though it's supposed to be a stop. Nope. Okay. Anyway. The other example I want to give you guys is the word that. And this is just a random word. I was thinking about this a few nights ago, like last week or something, when I was going to sleep because this idea was forming in my brain before I got the visual image. And I was thinking about a sentence, like that person is interesting. And I was like, okay, so let me think of like all the different ways that each sound could work. And I just got stuck on that. And I was like, oh my God. So there's like a bunch of ways. There's like at least 18 different ways to say this word. Now that might sound really crazy and complicated and like, okay, I don't even care about this. This is stupid now, but it's not that bad. Remember, we're talking about the quality and the range, especially the quality. Um, and depending on the sounds that we're talking about, there might be certain things. So we know the th is a special case, okay? Because as I talked about in the lesson, and as was pointed out by, oh, I can't remember the name right now. I don't know if he's here. Um, God, I'm really bad with people's names. um, but it was pointed out by one of you guys a while ago on one of my comments that the th is often actually pronounced as like a dental T or D, depending on if it's voiced or not. But English doesn't officially have dental T's or D's. And then when you actually ask a native, they say, no, I'm saying a TH. They don't even notice that they're saying a dental D or a dental T. But it is something that we do all the time. It's something that I do all the time. I've noticed it in my own speech. So that's sort of a special case where we have an additional variation of the TH that adds to the potential of how it might come out. Okay. So that all would also kind of go on that spectrum a little bit. Just like kind of the flapped D is like a different type of weak D. The dental T is like a different type of th. Doesn't matter if it's stressed or not or whatever. It's just like less clear than a full enunciated th sound. So if we talk about the th itself, just the th sound first. So we have a nice, clear, fully enunciated th. That's one possibility. And we know if we're going to go your front teeth here, top teeth, you can go anywhere along the back here. It doesn't really matter. As long as you're close enough and there's a little gap here, you can even put it through the teeth. That's fine. All of that is sort of a nice, clear th. Okay. The exact position of the tongue doesn't matter as much. It's more the relationship between the tongue and the teeth. And that would be the perfect th. Okay. And that's fine. So that's at one end of the spectrum. Then, of course, maybe if I'm speaking quickly or whatever, I'm a little lazy. Maybe I don't get quite all the way up close enough. I'm just a little bit farther back, right? And so instead of saying that, I say like that. Like I think that's okay. I think that. Like there's not really a th sound there at all. It's like super weak. It's pretty much almost dropped. Maybe it even is dropped, you could say. And part of the reason is because it's the word that. It's usually just a grammar word that we drop anyway. But that's possible. Okay. So we have nice and clear up. We have sort of a little farther back where it's a little less clear, potentially even dropped. Okay. So that's that whole range there. But then we can go the other way with this particular sound and make it into a flat or a dental D because it's a voiced th. D, that. Now remember, this is not a regular D. If you do a regular D and say dat, there are speakers who do that, and I'm not going to say it's wrong because it's not wrong. But for most English speakers, that will sound very uneducated, and it sounds very informal. Okay, so do not do a regular D or T for the TH sounds. It has to be this dental one if you're going to do that variation. Okay, and you don't have to do that variation. It's just something natives do frequently. I think this is related to the concept of allophones. Oh, technical terms. I have to look that up really quick. Allophones. I really hate technical terminology. I have my own ways of thinking of things usually. An allophone, other sound, is one of a set of multiple possible spoken sounds or phones or signs used to pronounce a single phoneme in a particular language. For example, in English, T as in stop. Okay, the T sound in stop. And the aspirated form T, like in top, are allophones for the phoneme T, yeah, while these two are considered to be different phonemes in some languages such as Thai and Hindi. Interesting. On the other hand, the Spanish D as in dolor and whatever that symbol is as in nada are allophones for the phoneme D, while these two are considered to be different phonemes in English. Interesting. So yes, I suppose that I'm just technically talking about allophones. There we go. But the useful thing here is I'm not just talking about allophones. I'm putting them into a visual spectrum that you can easily understand, easily remember, and make sense of what's going on, right? Um, that symbol is the TH. Wait, what do you mean? Oh, is it? It was really small. Let me look that up again. Because I know the IPA symbols for both THs, but it was super, super small on my computer. Let me see. Oh, yeah, it is the TH, isn't it? Nada, nada. That should be the voiced one because D is voiced. Nada. Yeah. And Juan and I have talked a bit about things that happen in Spanish, but most natives don't notice. Like there's actually two types of D's. I didn't even notice that when I was learning Spanish. Interestingly, I always just for nada. I always just when I have a T or a D in Spanish, the way that my ears always perceived it, I really picked up that sort of almost like TH sound, which I don't think it's exactly the same as the English TH. It might be the same IPA symbol, but I think there's actually a difference there. Um, but I mean, it would definitely become what English speakers would identify as like a kind of TH, but maybe not the perfect TH in English. Um, yeah, the voice TH. So whenever I do a D in Spanish, even though maybe it's not correct, um, because this is just the way that I notice to speak, that the sound, like nada, always stood out to me. It always stood out to me. And I would always kind of try to do it more dental, like a light dental. But I noticed later that sometimes people would have trouble understanding me depending on what word it was that I was using that type of D. And so I realized, oh, this is a problem. um, so anyway, uh, it seems to me that this information and knowledge will help us in that idea of feeling English or feeling the English language. Technically, you could say feeling the English, referring to like I don't know. That's a subtle difference, subtle nuance of grammar that it can work, but it's hard to describe. Like the English compared to the Spanish, for example, like the English version. So technically, I guess I would change that to the English language or just English with no the. Anyway. Okay, so we know what we're talking about. Allophones, blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever. But going back to that, okay, we're looking at the different ways, right? Different qualities of how to say that. So when we have the th, we have a nice clear the, okay, which is a range of position, but it's all pretty much the same. We have sort of the dental version, the, which is possible and very common, and then we have that sort of like just not clear th where it maybe even potentially be dropped. So we have our spectrum, but we'll just broadly uh, group that into or we'll say four possibilities. There's a potential drop. There's just a really unclear sound that's not quite in the right position. There's the nice, clearly enunciated sound, and then there's the dental sound. So that would give us actually four possibilities technically. It will ignore the drop because that doesn't always apply. So that gives us three possibilities for the th. Okay. I gotta go now. I will watch your stream later. Thanks for your help. No problem. Thank you very much for stopping by. I appreciate it, and glad I could help. Things. So with the th, we'll just say we have three possibilities to keep it simple. Okay. Then for the okay, that fourth vowel sound I try to phonetically write with the silent h. The fully clearly enunciated word is ah, right? You don't necessarily have to open your mouth that much, but that should be the sound. Now, one thing that I've noticed, and it was actually partially because David pointed it out and asked me, and the more I thought about it, I realized, oh, I kind of do that too. I don't know if that's like I don't always do it, but I notice that sometimes I do this where instead of saying like it's still an sound, it's still in the range of it's not an but it gets really close to that line where it like to you guys you probably would either say I'm not sure if it's 3 or 4 or it sounds like 3, where in my ears it's like no, it's still 4, it's definitely a 4, but it's not a clear 4. It's starting to sound a little bit like a 3. And that would be like instead of saying that, it'd be like, I can, I don't usually think about this. Let's see. Like that, that. Now an if I were trying to do the third vowel, it would be that. And it's definitely not that. I'm not saying that, right? I'm saying that, like that, not the. So it's really close, but it's not the third vowel. So going back to the range of the vowel, okay, that would be like a really unclear, not clearly enunciated fourth vowel. Okay. And you don't have to worry too much about that, but it does exist. So we'll go ahead and say that there's kind of two ways, right? Like a pinpoint ah, and then a unclear ah that sounds kind of like almost like it's towards the third vowel. So that gives us two possibilities. Now, if we have three ways to say the th that they could possibly come out, okay, this is just what happens to possibly come out because it depends on a lot of factors, or it might just be that the speaker happened to say it that way for whatever reason, because there were no special rules in place that made it likely to say this or that or whatever. Okay, so the three possibilities for the th, two possibilities for the ah. So that already gives us six ways that you might hear the word that be pronounced. Okay, it could be clear th, clear a, that. It could be clear th, unclear a, or ah, sorry. So like the. It could be, right, dental d plus clear so da, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? I'm not going to list them all. Is it possible to say that with a schwa if speaking very fast? Well, actually, I just realized there's another way to say the th, which is actually as a z. That's getting way out of. That's getting way too complicated. We're not going to worry too much about that. Yeah, it could pick up a schwa. So in this particular case, right, doesn't always reduce to a schwa, right? That is a grammar word, which is well, I mean, it depends on how it's being used, but it's often a grammar word that's not stressed, and we tend to drop it altogether. But because of that, grammar words that aren't stressed tend to have reductions. Tend to, not always, but it's common. Like of or not of. Well, of, yeah, we'll drop the v very commonly. Um, the becomes the, a becomes right? So it is possible, especially in fast speech. Yeah. Like if I say, but it wouldn't be, you want to make sure that it's not a clear schwa, right? It's not that's. Like that's a good idea. No, that would not be correct. But if it's like a super small schwa, like an actual reduction schwa, not like a nice clear sound, then like that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Yes. Possible. Things that I want. Okay, so things that I want. Things that I want. Okay, things that I want. Things that, that's the almost a version. Things that I want. Things that. Or schwa, things that I want. Things that, the things that I want. Yeah, anywhere in there is possible. See, there comes a point where this starts becoming not so useful because it's like, okay, how am I supposed to remember there's this? You don't have to remember it. That's the whole point, is because eventually it becomes a point where it's just too much knowledge and it's like trying to memorize things, which is why rules aren't all that useful. Some big rules are very useful, yes. And so the big points here, like the idea of the spectrum and the full version, the weak version, the dropped version, those are the big points that are useful to know. And there's little shades here and there all along of what could happen with the vowel and with the consonant, whatever. And it could be nice to be aware of that stuff, but right now I'm just exploring this basic idea with you guys. But when we start getting into things like this, like, okay, there's three ways to say the th, there's technically, I guess, three ways to say the vowel sound if we include the schwa possibility in this word, it becomes less and less practical and less useful. Okay, so I want you to take the idea, the main idea, and the big points, but we're exploring this example in detail just to kind of give you an idea of how a word could possibly come out based on various things. based on what's most likely in a particular sound in a particular position, based on if it's stressed or not, based on sometimes it just comes out that way, as long as nothing stops it from coming out that way. So we're just sort of taking a deep dive look here, but in reality, when you're actually practicing or you're trying to hear things, you don't have to be so super aware of all the range of possibilities. Just focus on your ear, focus on what you hear, and try to match it as perfectly as you can. That's all you're doing. Because otherwise it's just too much information. But to finish our example here, that was a good question though, Byron. I'll just call you Byron. So we know we'll simply say there's 3 ways to the th. We'll go and throw the schwa into the in this particular case. So there's 3 ways to say the all right? So that's 3 times 3. I'm pretty sure that's how you would calculate it. I'm really horrible with math, but that should be 9 possibilities, right? 9 combinations just for the first 2 sounds. Then if we have the T at the end, what's going to happen with that? Well, we know that by default, most likely, as long as it doesn't have some sort of connection, it's going to be a stop, whether that's a glottal stop or a regular stop. That's technically 2 possibilities, but it's not useful to really make that distinction for the most part. So we'll say that's 1 possibility. It could happen to be pushed out a little bit. That, yeah. So that. It could maybe for some reason, maybe I'm like, oh, that. I want that. Okay. Even then, I don't have to push out the T. I can say, I want that and do a stop. But in that case, because there's more stress, there's more emphasis, maybe it's possible that, yes, the T could be pushed out more and it could be really nice and strong and clearly enunciated. Not likely, but possible. So we have 3 possibilities for that T so far. Okay. And in isolation, that would pretty much be it. There's no flap here because there's nothing after it. But of course, if we add the sound at the start of the next word, we could possibly get a flap like that I or that is, right? That I, that is. So now we have 4 possibilities. It could be a flap to D. Even when it connects and it becomes a flap D, that's the rule. That's the rule. And this is a big part of this idea here. Most of the time, that's what you're going to hear. That it will become a flap D and connect. That doesn't mean that you can't do a regular T. Okay? If I say, things that I want, things that I want, and it'll be that I want. It's possible, especially if you're speaking a little more slower, if you're speaking a little more enunciation, it's just not the most likely thing. Okay? So a lot of these rules, especially connection rules, are directly connected to this spectrum of clarity. And the farther you are to the fully enunciated sound of any given sound, but especially between words, the more likely it's going to be that you end up actually pushing out the proper sound, maybe a weak version of it, but closer towards that clear enunciated sound. It's always possible, just not necessarily likely. Okay, that's what I want you guys to take away. So we'll go ahead and just say 4 possibilities for the T. Okay, so now we have 9 possibilities from the first 2 sounds times 4, if I'm doing my math right, which should be 36. Okay, so there's at least 30 possible ways based on the quality, right? The speed, the position, the force of air. In the case of the TH, are we doing dental or not dental? Is there something that's connecting afterwards or not? There's at least 30 different ways that this one word might happen to be pronounced. And that seems really complicated. But again, it's the idea that we want to take away here. We don't have to memorize all the details. That's not very useful. I hope that makes sense. We're down to 3 people, so apparently I started to bore some people. I know Seaton left. We were up to, I think, 6 at one point. But any questions, comments, I don't know, whatever, You can see why I'm having a little difficulty of like, how can I make this easy, less complicated, precise, and directly useful to somebody? Because it's just a lot. It's like it's almost like the problem most teachers have with grammar. Like they just give you grammar rules. Like I feel like I'm just giving you like natural rules instead of grammar rules, or like proper pronunciation rules. I'm giving you natural pronunciation rules. It's just a list of rules and information. And that's generally not useful. Um, so, but let's talk about my solution I do have for this, which is, as I mentioned, slow to fast shadowing. I usually just call it slow shadowing, but technically there's a fast part to it. Slow shadowing, and I think I've talked to you guys about this before. I don't know everybody who was here whenever I did talk about it, but um, there's shadowing, there's slow shadowing, and then there's slow to fast shadowing. And all of those are absolutely fantastic. I mean, they're just variations of the same technique. But shadowing is probably the single best thing. If I could only recommend one thing for an English learner to do, or any language learner learning any language, if it was, should I study grammar? Should I start speaking from day one? Should I, learn a bunch of pronunciation rules? Should I start with reading and just like read a lot and learn a bunch of vocabulary words? Of all the different areas of language and all the different things that you could possibly do, the one thing that I would recommend that you preferably start with, the most powerful technique, is shadowing, especially if you do it in a thorough way, not just blah, blah, blah. You're just like, okay, that's close enough. Like if you really listen, you really break down, okay, let's do the intonation first, right? The rhythm and stress. Okay, now let's focus on the actual sounds, right? Um, and you do that enough with a lot of examples over time, that is the single biggest key thing. Now, of course, the vowel chart and other tools so that you can actually figure out, okay, oh, that's what I need to do with my tongue. Those are side tools that go along with it, but the main technique, um, after learning vowels, because those cause most of the problems anyway, is to shadow. Okay. Um, so I do not know much about shadowing. Yeah, okay. So apparently everybody doesn't know this. So let's talk about this. I talked a little bit about shadowing recently on my TikTok. It was a two-part series where I sort of described the basic way that I like to do it. So for those who don't know, especially if you're watching the replay after almost 3 hours, um, shadowing is a term. I don't know who came up with that term. It might have been Professor Argelis, who's the first person I heard it from. And he has a specific way to shadow. He says, like, you should be listening to a dialogue and you should pace back and forth with, upright posture because the walking helps you process information. And that's how he does it. And it works really well. Other people like that. I usually don't walk around when I'm doing it. You can sit at your desk. That's fine. Those are extraneous details that aren't necessary. But shadowing is basically just mimicking. Okay. So you hear something, right? Say you have a recording, or maybe you took it from a TV show, or wherever you get it, you have some audio. That's not too long. You can shadow longer passages, but there are techniques to make that useful. And if you're just trying to repeat what you hear, you're not shadowing. You're just repeating. And it's not going to help you all that much. To an extent, but it's not going to help you as much. So let's say you take the sentence, I want to go to the beach. Okay. Like say if I gave you a recording, for example, I want to go to the beach. Okay. So you have that recording that you can play over and over and over and over and over again. And when you're shadowing or mimicking or parroting, some people call it like a parrot, you are trying to match exactly what you hear. This can be a problem because, as we know, there may be certain vowel sounds or maybe other sounds that you don't hear, which is why, again, we want to make sure we get our vowels down because that causes most of the problems. So, I mean, that doesn't mean that you can't start shadowing right away. You probably should start shadowing right away, unless it's just too much and you don't want to. You don't have to. But you're just trying to hear what you can hear. And it helps to get feedback from people because then they can tell you if you're missing certain sounds or details. But you can also do it by yourself, especially if you have a pretty good natural ear like I do, for the most part. But you're listening Okay, I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. You listen to it for a few times. I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. And you're going to try to mimic that exactly. The rhythm, the stress, the intonation, the sounds, the connections, everything. And ideally, it should be a sentence spoken naturally, right? You don't want like some beginner learner sentence. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but ideally you don't want to work with like, I want to go to the beach. Or sorry, I want to go to the beach because nobody talks like that. And then we're kind of back in like towards Elsa again, where it's just not natural, right? So try to find something that's more or less natural. And once you have that, uh regular shadowing, not talking about slow or anything, just regular shadowing, you just try to match all of those different aspects of pronunciation. Elsa speaks like that. Yeah, exactly. um I mean, it's not that bad, but yeah, eh. It's not quite there. It's not quite there. So what was I saying? See, you distracted me. I'm pretty sure I have ADHD. I'm telling you guys. Exactly. So that's what I said. um, I assume you're going to type something else. That's okay. Go ahead. I hear first a couple of times. Well, listen. Yes, listen and hear is a difficult pair, but listen to it first a couple of times. Yeah, let's talk about the steps I recommend. Let's talk about the steps I recommend. So, um, the basic definition of shadowing is you're just trying to match what you hear exactly, or as closely as you possibly can, which includes the sounds and the stress and all that stuff. Try to mimic it. Yes, very good. That's the basic idea. And you could do all of that at once, the stress, the sounds, everything all at once. What I find useful, and I think I originally got this idea from Idausa Ness, who is a polyglot who talks a lot about this, and I actually got a lot of ideas from him that I use and that I teach you guys. You won't find him if you just try to type in Idausa because his first name is spelled very, very strangely. It's pronounced Idausa, not Idahosa. Anyway, I think I heard about this first from him, where you actually break it into multiple steps. Okay, so first I would recommend that you just kind of listen to it. Okay, and really just kind of okay, what's going on? Like you're not particularly listening to anything. You're just kind of listening. Okay, what are the words? How is it flowing? How does it sound? Okay, so I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. Okay, then you're going to babble. I talked about babbling before, right? It could be babble, hum, or you could even dada. This was in one of the early pronunciation videos. I started talking a bit about this because this is one of the first steps, right? Don't worry, I will be making more videos on shadowing. I have it planned. I just haven't made it yet. But babble is what babies do, where they make little noises, you know? Hum is and dada is da 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 da. Okay. Any of those can work. The point is that the first pass when you actually try to repeat what you hear, you're not trying to repeat the words, you're not trying to repeat the sounds. You're trying to focus only on the stress and the rhythm. Okay. And you're trying to make your voice just follow along that stress pattern. Okay. So, like in Portuguese, right, or in Spanish or whatever language, but like in Portuguese, Portuguese is usually considered, especially Brazilian Portuguese, is considered very, very musical, right? And so there's going to be a certain quality to the voice. Like if I'm humming it, it's almost like I'm singing, right? You know, whatever it is. I'm not good enough with Portuguese to really remember much about that. But in English, right? I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. So you can, if you babble, you're saying, you're not really trying to say the words. You're just making sound. Okay. And make little adjustments if you think, oh, that, you know, that I'm not stressing that part, or, you know, I'm spending too much on this part. Just try to match it as perfectly as you can. If you hum, okay, it's a little less clear. Or da da, right? Da 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 da. And that can really make the stress syllables stand out because you're da 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 da, right? Any of those are fine, whichever one you want to do. Then the second pass, right? After you do that, however many times, at least 2 or 3 times, but however long you think you need, you don't have to get it exactly pinpoint perfect. You're just kind of trying to get it there. If you do it, 10, 20 times and it still doesn't seem perfect, I would move on to the next step. It's okay. You don't have to be perfect straight from the start. You're going to practice more later with other sentences. But try to get it as perfect as possible. When you move to the second step, pass number 2, what you're going to do is you're going to focus either on the basic sounds or the connections, right? Because when we have connections, that's part of sounds, right? It's just the sounds are changing or blending. And I would recommend trying to focus on the basic sounds. So don't really focus so much between words, like what are the weird things happening between words. Like, I mean, you could try to notice that first if you wanted to. It doesn't really matter. But when you're looking at the basic sounds, you're focusing on what are all the specific isolated sounds that I hear, and then how can I reproduce those sounds in my mouth as precisely as possible. And it's not as precisely as possible compared to what is fully properly enunciated, but it's as precisely as possible compared to what you hear. Okay. Now, if you learn the proper way to pronounce a vowel sound, for example, and what you're hearing is maybe like say ah, and then you hear eh, where it's maybe not exactly the same. It's like a higher up in the range, but still an ah sound. You can choose to ignore that and say, okay, that's a little bit less of a clear ah, whatever. I don't want to worry with that detail. I'm going to just say it a little bit clearer because we say that ah in fast speech, all the time. It's just you don't have to be pinpoint accurate with it all the time. So you can kind of pick and choose certain things if you want to maybe avoid some difficulties and complications and just say, okay, I'm just going to say this nice and clearly for this particular vowel sound, but the sounds around it, I'll try to adapt as best I can to what I'm actually hearing. So you can always do that if you want. You can sort of be flexible with it, but generally try to stick to exactly what you hear. And so like if say the word I want to go to the beach, I want to go to the beach. So there's there's w, a, n, g, o, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And obviously these are going to flow into each other, but you're really trying to make sure that you're hearing the proper sounds and that your tongue is able to travel the path for each of those sounds. It goes into the position for that sound. It doesn't as closely as you can. You can perfect it later. You're not going to perfect it immediately. So just get as close as you can at first. And then over time, you'll get better as you practice more with the individual sounds. And things. Once that seems okay, then you can shift your focus to the connections. Or if you did connections first, shift your focus to the basic sound. And when you're doing, you're going to do multiple times for the basic sounds. Just really focusing, making sure that you can say, okay, I wanna go to the beach. And you can isolate certain parts, right? You don't have to say the whole sentence every time. If you're having trouble with, say, I don't know, the ah sound, wah wah. Okay, I may have said ah earlier. I don't know why I said ah, but yeah, ah, ah. Maybe that's a difficult combination for you for whatever reason. And so like you say, like, I wanna go to the beach. Okay. So you say instead of wah, wah, and you can isolate that part and try to play with that in your mouth. Wah, ah, ah, wah, 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 wanna. And then, play it again, listen to it again, repeat it. Okay, I need to make it another little change. This is where all the micro adjustments come. Just like you use these little changes when you're trying to find the sound in your mouth in isolation, you can take that exact same thing when you're shadowing, find parts that you're having difficulty with, and just, play with it, then listen to it and make more adjustments based on what you hear, play with it a little bit more, play it, and you're just focusing on that one isolated part of the sentence, okay? So that you can improve that part, and then you want to put that part back into the whole flow, okay? So this is a very detailed approach where you're breaking it down into the different aspects of pronunciation. And then any difficult parts you have, you're sort of isolating them, practicing them, trying to put them back until you can do it well. Okay. Or as well as you can. Again, in the future, you can probably get it perfect or near perfect. If you're still new to this, you want to try to get it as perfect as you can. But there's a process. You're not going to get it 100% perfect now because you still need to focus, you still need to improve your sounds a bit, you still need to improve this or that a bit. But over time, as you do more and more shadowing and go back and practice this sound, go back and practice that sound, do more shadowing, it's going to improve until you can 100% perfectly mirror it. Now shadowing makes sense. Yes. Okay, good. Now, those are the 3 passes I recommend. 4 if you include just listening to it a few times first. So listen to it, babble it, basic sounds, connections, right? And then you isolate whatever you need to isolate and put it back in. Okay. Now, the types of shadowing. You could look at those as types of shadowing. But what I mean with types of shadowing, we'll say the speed of shadowing, because shadowing is an extremely, insanely powerful technique by itself. Okay. And even if you don't do my 3 steps, like you just try to mimic as closely as you can, really listening, but not breaking into the 3 steps, it can take you very, very far. Okay. Breaking it into 3 steps can take you even farther and faster. It's just more detailed, it's more intensive. However, there's an even more powerful way to do shadowing. And this is what's called a deep practice technique. Deep practice is a way that, even as a beginner in any skill, somebody can more quickly and more easily, it doesn't seem easy in the moment, but it's more easy overall, more quickly and easily reach either advanced or master status in a skill. Okay. And one of the keys to deep practice is, if you want to go fast, first you slow down. And there's a book by Dan Coyle. It's excellent reading if you want to read something in English. It's called The Talent Code. And if you're one of the many, many people in the world who think that talent is a fixed thing that some people have, and you don't have the language gene, or you're just bad at programming, or you'll never be able to learn it or whatever, read The Talent Code. Because yes, there is some natural dispositions, natural, things that people are kind of more naturally oriented towards and can be better at, physically or mentally. That does exist, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, unless you want to become like the next, Beethoven or whatever. If that's your goal, then maybe you do need some talent, but most people don't need to get that far. That's when you're going to dedicate your whole life to something. Just because you're not going to dedicate your whole life to learning the piano doesn't mean you can't play the piano extremely well. It's the human mind is really weird, and it makes things exaggerated and more complicated than they need to be. We have excuses that we like to use, right? Anyway, that aside, in the Talent Code, he basically breaks down. He went around the world to all these different places for like tennis, music, all this whatever, of these coaches that get extremely extraordinary results from their students, that they just tend to perform better than anybody else in the world at that skill. And it's not because the people are necessarily talented; it's because of the teaching techniques of the coach, right? And it's not necessarily just the way that they teach, it's some of the techniques that they use. So go slow to go fast. One example, I always love using this example because it's directly relevant to language, in terms of an analogy. He gives the example of, there's this music school, I forget what it's called, but it's this really, really top-notch music school. And one of the techniques that they use is, say, if you're learning how to play violin, right? You have the piece of music, right? And they want you to try to play on the violin this piece of music so slowly and accurately that it sounds like a whale song, right? It's not even recognizable as the same piece of music because it's so slow and drawn out. Okay. That is deep practice. Now, that's just one deep practice technique. Of course, there's other things that you can do, but it's a very valuable deep practice technique. And I have been thinking over the last several years of how to apply deep practice to language learning, especially pronunciation. Um, and one thing that I realized relatively recently, earlier this year, was what I call slow shadowing. And I don't think I'm the first person to talk about slow shadowing. I think Idausa also talked about it, but um, it's not just slow shadowing, it's slow to fast shadowing. Okay. And again, I'm probably not the first person to talk about this, but what I realized is so insanely effective. If you have, right, I wanna go to beach. And remember, don't trust your eyes in English. Don't trust your eyes because wanna, there's no T. You see a T, you might want to pronounce a T. You might even be trying to hear a T. There's no T. You could say want to. We do that sometimes, but remember, trust your ears, not your eyes. Okay. And Goda, same thing. It's a flapped D. Goda. What you would do, it's all the same things that I just explained to you. We have our 3 steps and everything. But you're going to do that. This is really intensive. Okay. Not everybody has the patience for this. You're going to do that in slow motion. And you're going to pay very, very, very particular attention. You don't necessarily have to do this with the rhythm and intonation because it kind of actually starts to mess up at such a slow speed. You'll kind of lose the rhythm and it's not practical. But for the sounds and the connections, you're trying to get your tongue to be as pinpoint accurate, not just in the range, but as pinpoint accurate as you possibly can. And not just that for every sound, but as your tongue flows from one sound to the next sound to the next sound. I wanna, okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you would have a version of the recording that is slower, preferably one that was naturally recorded slowly. I actually have some recordings like that. I'm going to release them on Patreon for you guys. If you want me to make lessons based around those slow recordings, I can, but I always thought those might be too boring for most people and it wouldn't be good for a video. But maybe if you see my mouth, actually it could be useful. So and of course, if you have the visual where you can actually see someone moving their mouth, that's going to be even better. That's just sort of an extra bonus, but that's not necessary. If you slow it down in a program like Audacity, if you don't know what that is, you can look it up. It's an audio editing program. You can take an audio file, just drop it in there, and you can edit it. If you slow it down in a program like that, in my experience, it tends to start making it a little choppy. Like you'll hear like, right, and it's okay, but it's not ideal. So ideally, you want somebody who is actually speaking slowly in the recording, but still doing so in a way that matches the natural way. They're not saying like "I want to," right? They're still saying "I wanna," exactly like a ghost voice. Okay. You could also call this ghosting, by the way. Like you're trying to, be like the ghost or the shadow of the sound, right? Um, and yeah, or you mean like a ghost voice in terms of the quality? Yeah, like boo, yeah, like that. It sounds kind of weird. Um, I anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay. I've been talking too long, guys. Talking too long. It's been 3 hours. So anyway, you slow it down first. You slow it down first. Okay. That in itself is so insanely powerful because you have the time, right? Where if you hear, I want to go to the beach, I want to go to the beach, that's super fast, right? And it's like, that's good. You want to try to be able to speak that fast, but you might not be there yet. And it's also, it's a lot for your brain to process, right? Even if you break it into the different steps. But if you slow it down and just focus on the sounds, your brain actually has the time as you focus on your tongue based on what you hear. I wanna, and you can really try to match the physical mechanics perfectly as you flow from sound to sound to sound to sound to sound. And it's also easier to notice if you're not doing something properly compared to what you hear because it's slower, right? Um, that's but that's not the best part, okay? The slow to fast is the best. So you slow it down first. and you practice that, and you want to be able to say it as perfectly as you can slowly, okay? Again, if you're new to it, just get it as good as you can. Do say 3 or 4 times, maybe 5 times, getting it as close as you can. You can note, okay, I need to work on this vowel, I need to work on this vowel, go do some extra practice on that vowel, come back later, try it again, or just, shadow other sentences later. But get it as close as you can at that slow speed. Then you're going to take that recording and you're going to slightly speed it up. Okay. Now, technically, you don't have to speed up the recording. You could have a regular fast version and a slow version. And then you can just sort of fill in the speed yourself. That's actually probably easiest because you don't have to worry about having like a bajillion recordings or editing it a bajillion times. So slow version, normal fast version, fine. But what you're going to do after that is you're going to try to take what you managed to more or less perfect slowly, and you're going to try to say it a little faster, just a little faster. Okay. So if first it was, I wanna, now you're going to do, I wanna, and you're going to make sure that you're still hitting all the same things, but just at that slightly faster speed. Okay. Now, what you're going to notice as you start speeding it up a little more, right? If you can say it a little faster and it's still the same, good. Maybe do it one more time like that, but move on to a little bit faster. Okay. A little bit faster, a little bit faster. And eventually you'll hit a speed where you can't hit it as perfectly. You can't do every single sound as perfectly, right? And what you do is you take the parts that you're not saying as perfectly when you were doing the slower, and you isolate that and you practice that part, okay, at that speed. Not super slow, not fast, but at that speed that you're having trouble with. And then you try to put it back in, okay, into the flow of the whole sentence. And you might have to take out multiple parts. It depends, right, on what you need. But once you have all those pieces improved and you can flow them all together at that, speed, then you're going to try to say it a little bit faster. Okay. So that's all you're doing. You're going from slow, make it as perfect as you can, speed it up, make sure it's as perfect as it can be. If it's not, improve little details, speed it up, speed it up, speed it up until you're at the point where you're at the same speed as the normal fast recording. I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. Okay. And the normal speed, native English for Americans, there's a bit of a range of what we would consider sort of normal and not like super, super fast or super slow. So it doesn't have to be like, well, like I just said, it doesn't have to be like, I'm getting a little excited. I'm trying to move to the next thing. There's a little bit of a range. So don't try to find like, a super, super fast speed or like just like a not too slow speed. Like as long as it's natural, right? Like if I give you a recording that says, I want to go to the beach, I want to go to the beach, that's fine. If it's, I want to go to the beach, I want to go to the beach, the speed is actually starting to mess with things, and that can be useful. But these are little quality details. Just make sure it's said normally, right? Try to find it from a natural source, either from a teacher who's giving you a recording and you know that they recorded it naturally, like I would, or I would try to at least. Sometimes things come out a little weird because we don't always talk that way when it's slowed down. Or if it's from like a TV show, a podcast, you're just taking an audio clip from something that is, naturally being said, then you're fine. But anyway, you want to speed it up until you can say it at fast speed, basically. And once you can do that, then you might say, okay, well, that will make me really good at saying that one sentence. And that's true. You will be really good at saying that one sentence and you'll never forget it. But that's not the point, right? Because there's certain sounds and certain connections and certain, rhythm and intonation in that particular sentence. And of course, there's certain details that can change. If I say I want to go to the beach compared to the mountains, those are other details. You don't have to worry about that. Those are other things you can practice at other times. It just, whatever is in this particular recording, that's what you're shadowing. But once you're good with one recording or one thing you're shadowing, then you can start another one, right? And you just repeat the whole process. Now, once you shadow enough sentences, especially if you're using the slow to fast technique and really putting in the time and effort to try to get everything as perfect as you can, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of energy. Okay. Not everybody cares enough, and that's fine. But if you want a native or near native pronunciation, I don't know if this is something you have to do because there are other techniques, but this is one of the only things that I can think of. In fact, it's really the single best thing I can think of to get you to that native or near native sound. Um, but it's going to take some time. You're going to have to, shadow many different sentences. And then at some point, there's a tipping point. You're not just trying to memorize a bunch of sentences and say them perfectly. Once you shadow enough things, right? Because the whole time you're practicing hitting the right spots, right? It's not just for the sentence, you're also improving your position for the sounds, right? And you're improving how quickly you can hit those positions, at least within the proper range, right? So this is directly applicable to what we were talking about here with all the ranges and stuff. You'll hit a tipping point after you shadow a certain number of sentences. That number is going to be different for different people, and it depends on if you have some actual natural talent or not. It might make it faster for you, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. Eventually, you'll hit a tipping point where this will start to really spill over into your actual speech. Okay, because pronunciation is not improved in conversation. It can a little bit here and there, but it's like grammar, right? Well, grammar is improved through speech. It's like grammar in the sense that you don't just memorize a bunch of rules; you have to actually practice it. But pronunciation isn't practiced in the flow of speech because you're focused on communicating, right? The pronunciation is important for the communication, so you can be understood. But you could have a really really thick accent, have perfect grammar, and be understandable, right? With having really horrible pronunciation. So the pronunciation is something that you specifically have to focus on outside of conversation. And based on the techniques that you use and the amount of time that you put in, it will start to filter into your speech. Okay. Um, and that's why shadowing is so insanely useful because you're actually taking the time to sit down and focus on, okay, what are these different things? How do I reproduce all these specific points? Yes. At some point in the, I don't want to say in the near future, in the relatively near future, once I finish the basic sounds, I have a couple other pronunciation videos that aren't basic sounds, like this video I want to do for this range stuff. Which who knows, I might end up putting this on the back burner, setting it to the side for now and making a lesson about it later because, as I said, I'm having difficulty making it less technical and more interesting because a lot of people will probably find it boring. But hopefully sometime next week this lesson will be made. But after I get those basic sounds down, I'm going to be touching more on some of these other aspects like different techniques and different whatever. And some of those videos are going to go at earlier points in the course. It's just I decided I want to get the sounds done so I don't have to worry about that anymore and I know all the sounds are done. So the course is still in progress. But I want to make a shadowing masterclass. And maybe even shadowing lessons where, the specific point of the lesson is to give you some material and walk you through some steps and techniques that you can apply to the sentence and we'll sort of like do it together in a way. I think some lessons like that might be useful, but I don't know if, most people would be interested. But I want to do a shadowing masterclass where basically everything I just explained to you, but in a more clear, concise way that wasn't kind of all over the place. And also maybe talk about some different techniques that like other people use to shadow. Like I said, Professor Argelli's, he likes to walk back and forth because it helps him process the information and stuff. That's something that might be useful to you, depending. So I will be talking about this again, but if nothing else, you can always come back to this live stream if you don't remember anything, and definitely check out the talent code if you're at all interested in, learning skills or maybe learning faster or better or more efficiently. So, yeah. Okay. Well, it has been over 3 hours, and I don't know if we have any other questions or if we have any other topics or if everybody is just getting kind of bored at this point. Yeah. Yeah. And we said that at the same time. Look at that. I'm going. Remember, ing, part of the ing, well, yeah, part of the ing is to be. Okay. When you're changing the verb into that progressive tense, like, I mean, you could say running is fun as a noun. You don't need to be, obviously, but it's always with to be. So I'm going to eat. Okay. Well, I think I am too. I don't think I've eaten anything today. That's not good. That happens sometimes. So yeah, I guess we'll go. Yeah, we're done. So I guess I'll give a second here in case anybody wants to squeeze in a question. Blah de blah de blah. Thank you guys so much for watching, stopping by. I'm glad I could help. And I will see you guys next time. Next week. I will be here next week. The exact time might change, though. Probably will change. Just stay tuned on Twitter for that. Okay, bye. Stream.